I'm gonna be here all day.
You're not like an operations guy.
Right.
You have no idea what happens. So you get the- Do you have an idea what?
Yeah. Traffic factor on my project?
For one Amazon,
It varies. Project.
but it's-
And you're talking about just the capacity factor.
With their, well, the production, like what's the actual?
I would
What's my?
guess that the action, the
Way
per,
there.
well, yeah, well, wind generation typically ranges somewhere between 33 to 40%, I guess. Yeah. And, but see, the thing is, a lot of my clients these days have hybrid projects, so they're also using battery to shift the power from the low load hours to the high load hours. And that has a substantial upward effect on the, I can find out for you. Roger knows.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, he can't give you a specific project numbers, but he can give you a general average. When do you need it by? Because he's in Hawaii and I think they're like 5 hours from Tuesday.
Thank you. Thank you.
No. He'll respond. It's just that, and he gets up early, but he's just probably not up at 3:30.
Yeah.
So I can just ask him. So.
Commissioner Pinochi, can you hear me?
I hear you fine. You hear me okay?
Yes, we can. All right, thank you. Morning, everybody. Morning. Thank you. All right. Time is now 8:30 a.m. Today is Friday, April 14th, I'm told. This is day 4 of the hearing in docket number 2022.07.078, application of Northwestern Energy, where we had left off last evening, as we had Mr. Cashel on the stand. But before we go back to Mr. Cashel, we had discussed stipulating to the entry of some pre-filed testimony. Northwestern Energy, do you want to pick up there, please?
Yes, thank you, Mr. President. After conferring with the parties, there is agreement, although I will note I did not hear from KELP's counsel, but they haven't been participating in this docket actively here during the hearing. There was no objection to moving 10 testimonies into the record by stipulation without having the witnesses appear to lay the foundation for that testimony. So I would move the admission of Michael McGowan, Jason McClafferty, Keith Mager, Sean Cleverly, Kurt Pohl, Greg Bailey, Aaron Bjorkman, Adrian McKenzie, Ron White, Paul Norman, their testimonies into the administrative record. 4 of the witnesses do have some corrections that they need to make to their testimony, so I plan to read those for the record, Mr. President, if that would be permissible.
I'm sorry, you went really fast.
I'm sorry.
Can you go through those witnesses again, please? I got 9 of the 10, I think.
Okay. Michael McGowan.
Okay.
Jason McClafferty. Keith Mager. Sean Cleverly. Kurt Pohl. Greg Bailey. Aaron Bjorkman. Adrian McKenzie. Ron White. And Paul Norman.
Okay. All right, go ahead. Please proceed.
So with respect to, and I should note that these corrections were circulated to the parties and commission staff last night. With respect to Jason McClafferty's testimony, his direct testimony, page 2, line 4, his title has changed since we filed the testimony in August of 22. His title is now the Director of Gas Transmission and Storage. Same with respect to Greg Bailey's direct testimony. His title has changed since we filed testimony in August of 22. His title is now the Director of Project Management in the Asset Management Infrastructure Department, and that's on page 1, lines 25 and 26 of his testimony. Keith Mager had a change to his direct testimony to correct math on page 19, line 7. On that line, the 1.57 million should be 1.9 million. And the 0.73 million should be 0.55 million. And finally, with respect to Michael McGowan's direct testimony, page 8, lines 5 through 7, and this is changes to his testimony to match the exhibit MSM-2 that's attached to his pre-filed direct testimony. On line 5, the language megawatt hour or MWH BAA load should be MWH input. On line 6, the 11,495,014 should be 11,471,062. And the word input should be added after annual MWH. Then on line 7, and that was on line 6, if I failed to mention that. On line 7, the 10,899,923 should be 10,802,594. the 5.5% should be 6.19%. And the annual BAA load should be deleted. And with that, Mr. Chairman, there are no other corrections to the testimony, so I would move their admission.
Any objection to the admission of the various pre-filed testimonies that have been discussed this morning? Seeing none, we'll move those pre-filed testimonies en masse. They are entered into the record. Thank you.
And Mr. President, I should have mentioned this. They have been provided already to the court reporter, and their exhibit numbers have also been provided to the parties. I don't know if you want me to go through those now, but I think they're clear.
Okay. I think we're good there. And then I understand that we have a request, Captain, from you as well to stipulation of testimony.
Yes, Mr. President. So the parties have agreed to stipulate to allow the following testimony to be admitted. So that would be the confidential direct testimony of Greg Meyer, the direct testimony and exhibits of Brian C. Andrews, and the direct testimony and exhibits of Chris C. Walters. They've also been provided to the parties and to the court reporter.
Okay, any objection to the admission of those pre-filed testimonies?
No objection.
Seeing none, those are admitted into the record as well. Have you provided that to the court reporter?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. All right, well, thank you for the cooperation on that this morning. Very much appreciated. Are there any other matters? Mr. No?
I think just a clarification, what was marked as 350 exhibit 26, and I think was in the record, was my memory from last night. We did provide an electronic copy, and we've remarked it as exhibit 27 because the 26 was Dr. Running's direct testimony. So it's exhibit 350 Montana exhibit 27, and we had moved it in the record, and I just as a housekeeping matter.
Oh, I appreciate that. Okay, just want to make sure we got a copy of that. We'll go off the record here for 1 second. Time is 8:37. We're going to go off the record here. Okay, time is now 8:38. We'll go back on the record. Is there any objection to admitting then a 350 exhibit 27? Seeing none, 350 exhibit 27 is admitted into the record. Any other housekeeping matters? Okay, seeing none, just a reminder to the parties, of course, that we have an obligation under the Montana Constitution to provide public comment. We will do that again at 9 o'clock. So we will do what we've done for the last couple of days, which is to break at 9 to allow public comment. And then we will move back into the evidentiary portion of this case. All right. So we had left off, I believe, with Mr. Cashel at the point where commissioners were going to engage in questioning. So Vice President Fielder.
Thank you, Mr. President. I have a few questions for Mr. Cashel. Mr. Cashel, I am looking at your testimony, pages 9 through 13 roughly.
Direct testimony or rebuttal?
This is your direct testimony.
Okay. 9 through 13?
Yes.
All right.
So I just would like a little bit more detail on some of the statements that you made there, if you would, please.
Sure.
On page 9, MRC 9. Line 18 says, please describe the impact of variable energy resources on Northwestern's electric transmission system. And you state on beginning on line 21 that Northwestern has had to add other resources to our system in order to provide the capacity needed for balancing the supply with demand on the system. Could you please just describe that to me?
Sure, there's actually, and thank you for the question, Commissioner. There's been actually several different resources and contracts added to the system. Probably the first one that was added specifically for integration of variables was the Dave Gates Generation Station. Basin Creek Generation Station, which is not owned by Northwestern, but we contract for the output, also helps in the integration of variable resources. And then the supply group as well, contracts for various capacity and other types of contracts that allow for variable integration of integration of variable resources as well. And Joe Steinmetz may be able to directly give you some more information on those resources. And as we've ended up with more and more variable generation, we've incrementally had to add those type of generation in order to balance our system appropriately.
And
And I should also say that Colstrip Unit 4, to some degree, also moves with the rest of our generating fleet in order to provide regulation and balancing.
okay. And the final portion of that paragraph that you provided in your testimony says integrating these resources has been and will continue to be increasingly more challenging. Can you please describe what you mean by that?
Sure. We haven't added, other than contracted resources, we haven't added any physical resources since the Dave Gates Generation Station that serves a purpose for balancing. On the other hand, we've added a very significant amount, I think somewhere in the order of 600 megawatts of maybe more megawatts of wind generation, and now some solar generation as well. That is variable in nature. And as that continues to come on the system, we continue to see some challenges as that happens. So does that answer your question?
Well, could you please describe what type of challenges?
Oh, sure. I'm sorry. So the challenge that we face is that the variable generation, as it's described, it can't be predicted very well. We do have wind resources and programs to predict the wind, and somewhat solar as well, but it's variable in nature and it can change very quickly. And it can go up and down much quicker than other resources that we have on the system. So as that increases, those challenges continue to be there. We continue to have a larger fleet of variable resources that can move up and down. And sometimes they're moving independently from one another. They're not necessarily all correlated. Certainly the solar generation is not correlated with the wind generation. And then we do see differences across our system with the wind, how it actually moves. Storms can affect both, and they're a bit unpredictable as well. So that's what I mean by challenges in integrating the resources.
Thank you. Can you speak to whether these challenges have had an impact on costs that are reflected in this, the requested rate increase?
Again, I think I'll give you my response from a transmission perspective, and then you may want to follow up with Joe Steinmetz or Blue LaFave. But yes, I think the costs are reflected specifically in some of the capacity contracts that the energy supply group enters into in order to provide different services on our system, including peaking and integration. So those kind of costs would be flowing through. I think they would be flowing through like the PCAM. We haven't added any additional generation resources that are part of this rate case, but certainly supply resources through contractual means are part of the PCAM.
I'm looking for some information about the impact that these types of resources that you're talking about here, the variable energy resources, have had on that PCAM cost. My understanding is that when we've had these extreme cold weather events in the wintertime, that the wind hasn't been producing, and that's part of why Northwestern has had to purchase high cost energy from other sources or other resources. Can you speak to that at all, or is that somebody else that I should be talking to about that?
So I can speak to it from a transmission perspective and the balancing authority perspective. And then I think Joe Steinmetz or Blue would be good to follow up with. And you are correct. When we have extremely high temperatures in the summer or extremely low temperatures in the winter. And when I say extremely, I mean, it can happen almost any day during the winter, I suppose, or the summer when we have an inversion and cold weather, but not much wind, for example. And I guess I'd bring you to December of 22, which is actually discussed in my rebuttal testimony. And we hit a brand new balancing authority peak during that winter event, December 22nd, I believe it was. About 2,073 megawatts is our new balancing authority peak, which eclipsed the previous summer peak by about 96 megawatts, I think it was. And during that period, the wind generation was quite low. Solar generation, of course, it was the winter, the morning peak. We didn't have solar generation. I think it may have contributed a little later on in the afternoons. But the result of all that was a significant need to buy energy in the market and move it into our system. I can't speak necessarily to the price of that. I guess that's probably a Joe Steinmetz question, but I know it was extremely pricey. And what I can also speak to is it put an extreme amount of stress on our transmission system. We were importing about half of our balancing authority load during the peaks during that winter event. So think about a balancing authority load of around 2,000 megawatts and having to import over 1,000 megawatts, right around 1,000 megawatts in order to serve our load on our transmission lines. That's what I was speaking to yesterday, and the concern I have about additional stress on our transmission system as resources within Montana continue to be closed. And then there's also the issue about contingencies on the system. And by contingency, I mean, and we've experienced these and did during December, when something fails. It was so cold during the December event that we had a couple of breakers fail in our 230 kV system going south into Idaho. And for a while, that line was limited and we couldn't import on that line. We had some other problems. So we didn't fail to deliver to our customers in December. We had some isolated outages for some customers. We didn't fail broadly, but it's as close as I've seen us come to failing. And I think the outcome of a failure such as that to not be able to serve our customers when it's 40 or 40 plus below, that's the reason that I'm most concerned about being able to reliably serve our customers. That's the worst time for any kind of a major failure.
Thank you. So you also mentioned in your testimony that Northwestern has added approximately $233 million in additions, less retirements to its electric transmission plant. Do those investments address the issues and the concerns that you just raised well enough?
To some degree, most of those investments have been internal to our system and focused on serving our load centers. What we have not invested in because of the difficulties that I described yesterday is additional interconnections to our neighbors, for example. That's very, very difficult to do. We've tried and were not successful a number of years ago with another interconnection into the Idaho area. So most of the investment we've made, roughly $260 million that you referenced, has been to our internal transmission system, and it's been very significant. Even within the state of Montana, I would also say that it's difficult to site and plan new transmission lines. We've had some success, but it's difficult. So most of those dollars were internal to our system.
And why is it difficult to site and plan new transmission systems or lines? In a nutshell, please.
That's a long list.
Sure, it is.
I guess I would say that it's difficult to get through the permitting processes. They're very involved. establishing purpose and need for facilities is difficult. And then just in general, from experience, we've had a lot of opposition from landowners, the public in general, about linear facilities and, you know, what it might do to them personally. So just a lot of resistance from public, other entities that are concerned about transmission lines. It's kind of ironic, I think, that, you know, we see a lot of desire for renewable generation, yet there's not an equal desire for construction of transmission that would probably aid in the integration of those resources.
I have lots of other questions on that, but I'm going to try to stick to our record here, so I'll forego that. Sure, Mr. President appreciates that. I do have a question about your discussion on supply chain issues as well. And I'd like to get some perspective on, you've mentioned that in your testimony that Northwestern is closely managing inventory levels to address material availability and lead times. Has this had an impact on the cost of providing energy to customers as well? Is it notable if it has?
There's certainly been an increase in our costs of construction and maintenance. The delay in equipment, delay in capital materials necessary for our improvements, and also the cost. We had manufacturers and suppliers that also experienced higher costs, and in some cases, those costs we had to pay more for the facilities or the equipment that we received. So yes, I don't have a number for you overall that I could say that we've experienced, but there's definitely been an impact in both terms of cost and timing associated with all of our supply chain materials. Some have been worse than others. I'll just give you one quick example, and that is our large transformers. I spoke about asset life yesterday, and one of our asset life initiatives is to assure ourselves that we're replacing our large transformers appropriately. Lead times for some of our larger transformers have gone to 2 years plus in order to order and receive a transformer. And the costs have certainly increased as well. That's just one example.
Are you able to actually acquire and have those transformers on hand, or?
Transformers have been particularly difficult, not only at the large scale like I've described, but also at the single phase pad mount transformer. In that class of transformers, we actually were not able to get the amount of transformers that we needed for our customer growth from our normal supplier. They cut us back by about 30% on deliveries, as I recall. So we ended up having to go to another supplier. The costs were greater. We ordered that group of single phase pad transformers December of 21, and we were assured we'd receive them in 22. We still have not received them.
Thank you, Mr. Cashel. I think that's all, Mr. President.
Thank you, Vice President. Commissioner Pinocci, are you on?
I hear you fine.
All right. Do you have any questions for this witness?
Yes, sir, I do.
Okay, please proceed.
First, I want to apologize to everybody. I have a hearing out of town today, and transmission is one of my favorite subjects because I sit on the National Board of Electricity. Mr. Cashel, you had some questions yesterday about increasing transmission to Bonneville. I think the goal of those questions were, if we could get more power from Bonneville, you wouldn't have the need to put in the gas fire plant in Laurel. Do you believe that was the crux of those questions?
The way the questions were asked, I believe that could have been the motive, yes.
All right. Now, I think this is important to go over because let's say we did that. They're explaining to me at meetings across the country that we're having a shortage of power in the Western United States. And if we spent and made the investment on those power lines to Bonneville, it's possible that we could wind up paying 10 times more for the power, bringing it in from out of state than generating it ourselves if the conditions were right. Do you believe that's a concern we should have?
Commissioner Pinochi, thanks for the question. And I guess I'll answer it a little differently than you posed the question, but the answer that I would give is that consistent with what I described yesterday. First of all, it's difficult to build new transmission, build new capacity in to the system, and costly. And the other thing I would say, consistent with what you just said, is that Northwestern and its balancing authority certainly aren't the only ones that are suffering from a deficiency from capacity. And in fact, the entire Pacific Northwest and the entire West has seen the same issue. And my testimony goes into this a little bit, but Joe Steinmetz certainly does as well. But we've formed what's called the Western Resource Adequacy Program. And it's an acknowledgement, essentially, that the entire West sees a need for additional capacity. In fact, we're kind of at a critical point right now where there's concern that we can't serve our customers reliably across the entire West footprint. So the Western Resource Adequacy Program is being designed to introduce rules so that folks across the region do have resources and commit to resources to meet not only their load, but a certain amount of margin over the load that we serve. So, for several years, Northwestern's been concerned about its own resources, but now I'd say it's much more broadly seen within the Pacific Northwest and the West that it's a concern widely. So to more precisely answer your question, I think you're right. I mean, relying on a region that's already deficit to serve our load and not being long-term planning and not planning to serve our load with resources that we control, I believe is a risky path to take.
Our goals are similar: safe, reliable, and affordable. To increase the amount of generation in Montana, instead of relying on bringing it in from out of state, meets the goals of safe, reliable, and affordable more so than if we built transmission lines to bring more energy in. Would you agree?
So we're on the same page. The closing statement I had in my rebuttal testimony is that two things really, that our transmission system in Northwestern's territory and also in the Northwest, the Pacific Northwest and the West, is robust, but it is the latent capacity within that system is being utilized more and more each day. And I believe that there is a mixture of resources that need to be built, certainly on our system and across the West, in order to fully serve our customers. That doesn't mean we don't need to build transmission, however. I think it's important that we all understand that transmission is going to be a critical part of the entire system as it is right now, the bulk electric system going forward.
We're going to get to transmission in a minute for sure. So with the amount of construction and people moving into the state of Montana at a record amount, isn't it true that the amount of connections and the increased demand for electrical has happened in the past years? Is that correct?
What I can speak to is my experience at the transmission and balancing authority level. And I mentioned that earlier, that we've continued to break records summer, winter, summer, year over year for the last several years. So our demand continues to rise.
I think it's very important that we get that on the record, that the Public Service Commission understands that, and Northwest Energy certainly says that's the case, which I think builds a stronger need to produce more electrical power in the state than we do today. Montana does not produce enough electricity to supply the state. It's important for the record that we have to bring in power from outside of Montana for Montana continue. The goal I think we should have together as a commission and Northwestern Energy is to produce more power in the state than we need. If we were to meet that goal, you think we would be in a better situation to meet safe, reliable, and affordable?
Commissioner Pinochi, is that a question?
Yes, and here I was trying to save time. Let's talk about, again, we do not produce enough energy in Montana to support Montana, so we have to import it. If we produced more than we needed, we would be more reliable, because there could be a time where we reach out for energy outside the state. We can't bring it in, which means we have to have a controlled brownout. So that covers reliability. And actually, that has nearly happened in the past. Also, safe, if we can't bring the energy in because it's not available and it's the middle of winter, this is going to be a safety concern. Okay, let's talk about affordable. When we bring power in from out of state and
Commissioner
it's scarce.
I'm sorry to interrupt you, but we're at the 9 o'clock hour, and so we have publicly noticed this as the public comment time, so.
I'll hold.
All right, thank you so much. Okay. Welcome, everybody. Time is now 9:01 a.m. In keeping with our public notice, we will move out of the evidentiary portion of our hearing and into the public comment portion. All right. So for those of you who have not been here previously, we do have a number of public commenters this morning. So what we're going to do in order is those in the room will get priority for providing public comment first. We do have some online commenters. Try to keep, actually, I'm going to keep your comments limited to 3 minutes, because as you can see, we have a number of witnesses and attorneys and parties here. So let's move right into it. I will call you by the number you signed up, the order you signed up. So Thomas Meinzen, could you come forward, state and spell your name for the record, and identify where you're from, and welcome.
Thank you for having me. My name is Thomas Meinzen. It's ThomasMeinzen. Yep. Best. Still nothing. Checking now. There we go. Cool. So I'm a graduate student at Montana State University in Bozeman. And I am here today because I'm concerned about this rate increase, how it will affect me, how it will affect the rest of Montanan people who live here. And I'm curious for all of you if you've ever seen a rate increase of this size, because to my knowledge, this is the largest rate increase that has ever been proposed in the state of Montana. And that's a pretty big deal. Montana is already getting more expensive for people to live here. And in Bozeman, a lot of students like myself are finding it harder and harder to live as students in Montana. A lot of people who want to come move here to go to school are finding it difficult to pay their bills, to pay for groceries. And this is just going to compound that issue in a huge way by increasing the cost of living for people in Montana. About 10,000 students off campus at Montana State University, they already struggle to afford to live in Bozeman. And because Northwestern Energy is a monopoly, they don't have another choice for power. We can't choose our energy, which is why we rely on you to regulate and to make our energy costs fair. We're already paying, as Montana's, the highest residential electricity rates of any state in the Northwest. And if this rate increase goes through, it'll be over 50% higher than our neighboring states. And part of the reason why Northwestern needs these huge rate increases is because they're investing in energy that's becoming less and less efficient compared with renewables and less cost effective. With all these federal tax credits, renewable energy is becoming more and more affordable, while mining coal and operating gas plants is becoming less and less efficient. You mentioned, safe energy as well. And really, fossil fuel energy is not safe for us. We've all seen the impacts on climate and air pollution. And when we're talking about safe energy, coal and natural gas is not the way to go. Northwestern Energy continues to buy more shares of Colstrip. They've bypassed your approval to construct this $250 million natural gas plant near Laurel, even though they've been denied the permits required to do this. And so I think this is a sign that Northwest Energy is making poor decisions in regards to energy for the state. And as a result, they are asking for a huge rate increases.
30 seconds.
Cool. I hope that all of you will help us hold Northwestern Energy accountable for all of us consumers, and send them a message that investing in dying industries like coal and methane and then turning around to request that we all pay for it is a bad idea. So as one concern for all Montanans, I urge you to incline rate increase. And thank you for your time.
Thank you, Thomas. I appreciate it. Okay. Jenny Nielsen, who has been with us before. Are you in the room? Jenny Nielsen? She has commented 2 times before, so we'll move on. All right, Caitlin, I'm sorry to do this to your name. Caitlin Pishersha? Caitlin Pishersha? Okay. Boy, there's some tough names on this list today. Michelle Uberiga. Jennifer, you want to come up?
Hi, thank you, everyone. My name is Jennifer Loren Nielsen, Jennipha Nielsen, Nielsen. Apologies, there's a little ice coming over from Missoula today. Dear members of the Montana Public Service Commission, I'm here today to express my concerns about Northwest Energy's request to raise rates on its customers. As a monopoly for many Montana residents, Northwestern Energy has a responsibility to provide its customers with reliable, affordable, and sustainable energy solutions. However, the fact that the company is still considering coal as a viable energy source shows poor business management and a lack of awareness of the changing energy landscape. In a free market economy, a poorly led business that ignores available incentives and offers an outdated service would ultimately fail. In the case of Northwestern Energy, the company is ignoring the opportunities available in the Inflation Reduction Act, the IRA. This act offers nearly $370 billion in available tax credits, incentives, and other financing that could help accelerate the investments in renewable energy, hydrogen, fleet electrification, carbon capture, storage, and other technologies. By rejecting the IRA, Northwestern Energy is not only missing out on these financial incentives, it is also falling behind in its commitment to carbon reduction and ESG goals. In a recent survey by PwC, more than 80% of energy and utility executives listed growth as a top priority. The IRA presents an opportunity for Northwestern Energy to pursue that growth while also delivering on its environmental commitments. As a business owner, myself, and a Montana taxpayer, I'm deeply concerned about Northwestern Energy's poor business decisions. Ignoring the $370 billion worth of incentives to push an outdated form of energy raises questions about the company's leadership and judgment. It's time for Montana's Public Service Commission to give Northwestern Energy a reality check. Hold them accountable for poor business practices. I urge you to vote no on Northwestern Energy's request to raise rates on ratepayers. It is time for Northwestern Energy to realize the times have changed. The utility opportunities are available to them through the Inflation Reduction Act. Your leadership can be the guiding and firm hand that Northwestern Energy needs to stop using Montana customers to fund poor
15
business
seconds.
decisions. Thank you for your attention to this matter. Also, as promised, because my word is my bond, I brought brownies. The guys up the street get all the free food. I know how it goes. Also, you have here today, sitting at this table, a greater impact on everyday Montanans by this decision than they do up the street. Additionally, enclosed is my letter and an Excel sheet of all the funds available in the IRA to electrify rural America. I've got copies for all of you. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Nielsen.
I'll give it to the staff. If they leave me any, that's your choice.
Thank you. All right, let's circle back to Caitlin. Caitlin, are you in the room? Okay, Michelle Uberaga. I'm so sorry, Michelle, for slaughtering your name, but welcome.
It's quite all right. It's a mouthful. It's Uberaga. And I appreciate somebody called me this morning and asked how to pronounce it, which was really cool. Good morning. And thank you so much for your time. I know you have a very full schedule. It's been a long week. So I want to thank you for opening the doors for the people in our communities most impacted by your decisions today to have a moment to speak. So like I said, my name is Michelle. I'm a mother of 3. And I'm a business owner. And I'm a member of Moms Clean Air Force. I am here today to voice my concern and my opposition to the huge rate increases for the people of Montana proposed by Northwestern Energy in this docket. I need you to know, if you don't already, that most Montanans cannot afford an additional $200 to $300 a month. I heard Commissioner Pinocci say this morning that this commission goals are safe, affordable, and reliable. Well, we are seriously missing the mark with this proposal, asking Montanans to step up and fill the pockets of executives, investing in old, dirty, and unreliable energy, asking us to pick up the tab for the failing coal plants, and we're paying attention. Everything is increasingly expensive. We're facing a housing crisis, a childcare crisis, a student loan crisis. I'm lucky I have a home. I still don't know how we'll afford an additional $300 a month. We pay $1,000 a month for childcare. And I'm waiting to start paying $600 a month any minute again for my student loans. Meanwhile, Northwestern Energy's executives are lining their pockets, earning thousands of dollars per week. Please do not agree to increase our rates just to increase the profits of Northwestern Energy executives and corporate shareholders. Please don't allow Northwestern Energy's executives to continue to steamroll our communities and strap the next generation with failing, old, dirty energy. I implore you, for the sake of all Montanans and my children, please say no.
All right, thank you, Michelle. Our next public commenter is Janice Morrow. Janice Morrow. Okay, we'll move on. Calvin Serving. Hi, Calvin. Welcome.
How's it going?
Good. Please state and spell your name for the record and identify where you're from.
Thank you. So I'm Calvin Servine. That's spelled Servheen. I'm a senator in the Associated Students of Montana State University student legislature. And I'm also the sponsor of our February 23rd resolution opposing this rate increase. I represent the 16,700 students of Montana State University who overwhelmingly oppose this rate increase because it will significantly affect our cost of living in Bozeman, and because it represents a pivot away from independent clean energy. So this resolution, which passed our Senate unanimously, stated that representing the voice of the students of Montana State University, the Student Senate opposes Northwestern Energy's proposed 25% electric utility rate increase, urging a rational pivot away from expensive and environmentally damaging coal and other fossil fuel electricity generation and towards a cleaner and more affordable generation future. This forward-looking economic decision must be taken immediately to avoid drastic economic fallout from a growing stranded asset portfolio and associated runaway rate increases, ensuring Montana's energy independence in perpetuity. So this resolution was passed before we learned that the true proposed rate increase is now even higher at around 28%. By declining this rate increase filing, the Public Service Commission could force Northwestern Energy to pursue a more rational electricity generation future. And Montana is well positioned to implement the transition away from coal. HB 467, which was passed by the Montana State Legislature in 2019, allows utilities to pursue ratepayer-backed securitized bonds on stranded electricity generation assets that are no longer economically feasible, such as the coal strip generation plant. These securitized bonds allow utilities to accelerate asset depreciation timelines ahead of schedule while remaining financially solvent to reinvest and continue providing reliable electricity to Montanans. Northwestern Energy currently has no plans to pursue securitization for any of its generation assets. If Northwestern Energy is to live up to their stated environmental goals, they must pursue securitized bonds to plan for coal strips early retirement, investing in the economic development and retraining for the coal strip community. The sun is setting on this unique opportunity for Montana to take national leadership in an independent and affordable renewable energy future. It is past time that Montana moves beyond coal and other fossil fuels. You, the Public Service Commission, must stand with ratepayers. We will not pay for the economic negligence of fossil
15
fuel
seconds.
infrastructure. So our resolution was submitted to the Public Service Commission on February 24th. And if you haven't already, we urge you to please read the full text of the resolution. Thank you.
Right. Thank you, Calvin. Okay, Joan Montaigne. Joan Montaigne. Thomas Meinzen. Damian Lyon or Damian Lynn. I'm sorry, Lynn. Welcome, Damian.
Thank you. Morning. Thank you for commissioners. My name is Damian Lynn. It's Damion, last name Lynn, Lynn. I oppose this rate increase. Montana residents are being strangled by high rent prices, high mortgages, inflated grocery prices, and high gas prices. This increase will cause families to have to choose between paying for electricity and buying food for their children. I know this because at one point in my life, my parents had to make that choice. We went months and months without power, without the ability to take a warm shower, to cook food, to heat the house, and have access to the vital services that are on the internet. This was terrifying and shameful as a child, knowing that you no longer lived in a world with access to electricity, that even though your parents both worked, that they can't afford to pay the bill, and that you can't invite your friends over to be able to hang out with because you're ashamed of it. And this rate increase from November of 2022 of 28% will result in thousands of residents in Montana having to face this choice. And I don't want that. You are my PSC members. I live in District 3. Please do not approve this 28% rate increase. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Lynn. Evelina Herrick. Hi, welcome. Please state and spell your name for the record.
Yeah, my name is Evelina Herrick, spelled Evelyna, last name Herrick. And I'm going to keep this relatively brief. I just want to make you guys aware that Northwestern is committed to being carbon neutral by 2050, right? But what have we seen this year? They're asking us to help pay more for what? What have we seen? We've seen them grappling with local Montanans about a methane plant, right? That is only gonna increase carbon emissions significantly. What is methane? Is CH4, right? That and O2, that's gonna release a lot of CO2 into the air. And a coal strip, right? That's a lot of going backwards, right? I think if we want to be carbon neutral, we got to start now. And I don't personally want to sacrifice hundreds of dollars for something that isn't even going to benefit my future or the health of Montana or its environment, right? So that is my primary concern, is just to ask you guys to support us, right? We have nowhere else to turn to. All we have is Northwestern Energy in Montana, right? That's all we really have. And if somebody doesn't hold them accountable, I mean, I am 22 years old. I work at Taco Bell, right? I had to change my tires the other day. I have to get my brakes fixed. A few $100s is a lot to the majority of Montanans, right? And I just ask that you guys, support us, stand up for us. We need you. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Herrick. All right, this one's a tough one. Emma Papacown? I'm sorry, Emma. Welcome.
Good morning. My name is Emma Papazian. That's going to be EMMAPAPAIAN. Commissioners, good morning, and thank you for having me here today. I will start just quickly by saying that as a commenter, I do not financially benefit from this rate increase. Today is one of my 2 days off. I come from Bozeman. I work at a grocery store. This winter, I woke up cold most mornings because my 5 other roommates and myself could not afford to heat our home enough. With this proposed rate increase, us Montanans would end up paying 54% more than our neighbors in the Dakotas, Wyoming, and Idaho. I cannot imagine in what state I and other Montanans will be waking up in next winter if this increase is approved. Thanks to the Inflation Reduction Act, however, unprecedented amount of money is available to us to actually decrease our energy rates by investing in renewables. Montanans want clean and cheap energy. We want these jobs. We do not want or need another expensive gas plant. As your constituent, I would like to please urge you to not approve this rate increase. Commissioners, please keep Montanans warm. Do not raise our rates. Thank you.
Thank you, Emma. Josephine McMahon. Welcome, Ms. McMahon. Please come forward.
Good morning. My name is Josephine McMahon, JOSEPHINE MCMAHON. I'm a recently graduated biologist, and I've worked for Gallatin County, Madison County, many graduate students, and most recently the state of Montana. This is my first day off in 12 days, and I felt compelled enough to wake up at 6 a.m. to drive here in person to make this comment. The number keeps changing, but last I heard Northwestern Energy is asking for an increase of 28% for residential consumers. This is the largest increase Montana has ever seen, and this increase puts the burden on residential consumers and hardly any on commercial and industrial consumers. This settlement was agreed upon in a meeting where the only group allegedly vouching for regular working class Montanans was a group I've never heard of and which certainly does not represent me. That's not okay. Working class Montanans are the backbone of this state, and we cannot afford this increase. I cannot afford this increase. Working full-time for the state of Montana, I make in a year what the CEO of Northwestern Energy makes in about 20 hours. Montanans are getting priced out of living in the state, and the increased cost of utilities will only exacerbate this issue. Please think about your constituents, about the hardworking people of Montana, and vote no to this rate increase for us. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. McMahon. August Shore. Welcome, Mr. Shore.
Hello, I'm August Scher. August, just like the month, SCHUERR. I just urge you guys to please be our champions here on this. Your job is to protect us from, we're all grocery store workers. I work as a machinist. You know, we are the people that you represent. And, you know, it's intimidating to be up here. You have millionaires and lawyers and all of these people who have an interest in rates raising. And I just urge you to please protect us. This rate raise will be taking food out of people's mouths. And I just hope you guys consider that.
Thank you, Mr. Schurer. Sabrina Morgan. Welcome.
Thank you for having us, commissioners. Good morning. My name is Sabrina Morgan, SABRINAMORGAN. I am a senior here at MSU, graduating in just 4 weeks exactly from today, actually. And instead of spending my last few hours as an undergraduate, I'm taking my time that I will never get back to come here to Helena and beg for you all to see how this rate increase will impact your community. I say your community because the people sitting in front of you today are those who are serving you dinner. We are teaching your children. We are cleaning your houses. We are providing you medical care. And we are those who have elected you to represent us and protect us from harmful decisions that Northwestern Energy is trying to make. Northwestern Energy is single-handedly forcing us out of our homes and making expensive investments that come out of our pockets, not theirs. The Brian Bird, who is not here today, makes 26 times
Please
more.
don't use formal names. Thank you.
He makes 26 times more than their average employee. So it makes me question where this rate increase money is actually going. States are eliminating their use of electricity generated from coal, while here Northwestern continues to put these investments in degrading infrastructure and resources that are extremely harmful to our environment, to us. So Montana truly is a treasure state, and we're here today asking for you to protect it, to protect us, and turn down this rate increase. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Morgan. Julie Bass. Julie Bass. All right, I saw Mr. Edwards in the room. Jim, you want to come forward? Welcome.
My name is Jim Edwards, JIMEDWARDS. I'm retired. I'm here because anything that's historic, I guess I'd like to be a participant in. I learned reading the paper today, 28% rate increase, historically large. Details surfaced midweek, which seems shameful. Somebody's not doing their job here. That's really a problem, okay, for details to surface midweek. PSC can reject the rate settlement agreed upon by the Walmart federal agency and the Montana Consumer Council. I'm here to recommend that you do so. And the Montana Consumer Council was surprised by the amount of the rate increase individual customers would face. That's what I read. And that seems to me to be shameful as well as our advocate. The Consumer Council Representative Brown indicated Northwestern Energy undercollected for residential customers in 22, and thus the requested rate increase is reasonable and should be approved. So a question that I have, what is the exact dollar figure that Northwestern Energy is attempting to recover from customers that wasn't paid for in 2022? And maybe that number's out there, but we should know that number. If it's to recover what wasn't paid for, you should know that number, we should know that number. Secondly, solution to the historical increase, according to Cynthia Fang, is for consumers to avail themselves of the various assistance programs made available by Northwestern Energy to its customers. Question, what was the dollar amount of the assistance that Northwestern Energy provided in 2022? We ought to know that number. If that's going to be a solution going forward, what was the dollar amount that they provided to help people in 2022? That would be an offset to their earnings. And if you don't know that, we need to know that. Third thing is, what's the number of employees Northwestern Energy has? Can I ask you that? Are you able to give me an answer on that? Or is it, I don't know what it is, but My point here is legislatures across the country today are considering bills to regulate hospital CEOs' compensation to a multiple of the average compensation of their total average employee compensation. Waded Cruzado in Bozeman, the president makes about 400,000.
Please don't use proper names, Mr. Edwards. Thank you.
The president Cruzado the president of MSU, I'm sorry, makes 400,000, has about 4,000 employees. Superintendent of billing schools makes 2,000 employees, makes a little less than 300,000. So the Northwestern Energy CEO has no personal risk as a business owner, and this person's compensation needs to be thought of. The Northwestern Board of Directors has a compensation structure for its that's designed for a CEO to provide maximum compensation based upon Northwestern Energy's profitability. The PSC is our state's ratepayers' only advocate.
30 seconds, Mr. Edwards.
You're our only advocate. And I think that you should adopt a policy where the income of the CEO, which is weighted now maximum profit, you ought to have a metric that says we're going to put in what your average rate increase is, and that we're going to ding you if you're managing your company. So you need to come back and ask for a 28% historically large rate increase. Somebody should not be getting paid bonuses when they're asking you all to approve a 28% increase. Something's failing. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Edwards. Good to see you. Okay, parties, we have a lot of public interest this morning. Obviously, I am inclined to grant additional time for public comment this morning because of the travel that has gone through this morning. So if the parties will indulge me. All right, we'll try to end public comment at 10, grant another half hour. Tim Nielsen. Morning, Mr. Nielsen, please come forward.
Good morning, President Brown and Public Service Commissioners. Tim Nielsen, TIM, last name NIELSON. I've worked for Wesco Distribution in Butte, Montana for 11 years. I'm our strategic account manager overseeing our Northwestern Energy relationship. Our Wesco office in Butte has been in the same building on South Montana Street since 1946. We have employed numerous Butte Americans over the years. We currently employ 8 full-time employees, most of whom are descendants of original Butte immigrants. In Montana, we provide materials, services, and effective solutions to support Northwestern's electric transmission, distribution, and communications product requirements. We supply thousands of materials from pole line hardware, insulators, and conductor to arresters and cutouts. We have locations in Billings and Kalispell that provide additional support for materials in Montana. Wesco prides itself in sourcing high-quality, low-cost, value-added products and services to support the electric infrastructure in the state of Montana. Our strategic alliance with Northwestern spans many decades. We've retained this business by being a cost-effective, high-quality material and services provider. Since the COVID pandemic began 3 years ago, supply chain globally, nationally, and locally has been disrupted more than ever and is still not fully recovered. Our manufacturers have suffered greatly from the disruption and dislocation of labor, raw materials, and capacity. With economic demand increasing faster than our manufacturers' ability to recover from the crisis, there have been significant cost increases. These increases have been passed through to customers to cover higher costs in transportation, labor, equipment, and raw materials. Manufacturers have been forced to compete with other industries for labor and raw materials, further impacting the electric distribution and supply industry. Wesco, my local team, and I have worked very close with Northwestern Energy and our manufacturers to come up with innovative solutions to manage the crisis and mitigate as much risk in terms of cost and material availability as possible. This has been no small task in the current market. We are continually researching alternative sourcing options from multiple manufacturers, diligently analyzing inventory allocation based on need, holding additional inventory levels to deal with longer lead times. Trying to make it in 3. Leveraging our spend with manufacturers to obtain best pricing. Any pricing adjustments require documentation and pre-approval. However, despite all these efforts, costs and lead times have increased. Like other businesses, Northwestern Energy needs appropriate rates to reliably serve its customers. Wesco shares Northwestern's vision of operating and maintaining a cost-effective transmission and distribution infrastructure. This is an important time in the utility business with increased focus on reliability and capacity across Montana and across the nation. I hope that the Montana Public Service Commission realizes the efforts, commitments, and importance of Northwestern Energy, particularly in these difficult times of crisis, and will grant Northwestern Energy the request for support from the commission. Thank you very much.
And that was 2 minutes and 59 seconds. Thank you, Mr. Nielsen. The next commenter will be Lydia Petrosky.
All right, thank you. Yeah, it's Lydia Petrosky, Lydia Petroske.
And please state where you reside.
Yeah, I'm a resident of Bozeman. I'm a renter there. I work as a healthcare worker and I'm a student. So as you can tell, my time off these days is pretty limited. But I still woke up early today to come all the way here to express my frustration and fatigue with Northwestern Energy's actions. I oppose the rate increase. I oppose funding any new fossil fuel infrastructure in Montana. We're heading in the wrong direction with both this rate increase and the actions of Northwestern over the last few years as they continue to invest in dirty energy. I already find it hard to afford my utility bills each month. And I see patients every day at work who are struggling to get by, who have delayed getting health care because their bills are already too high, and now they're in a worse situation, and we're trying to provide care. What millionaire business executives don't understand is that we, working class people, don't have wiggle room for our bills to go up. The rate increase as proposed is untenable. The PSC is supposed to protect us, the people who are busy working and struggling to pay our bills, the people who couldn't make it here today to make comment because they're at work. Do right by us, don't approve this increase. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Petrosky. Next commenter is Tim Holmes.
Well, thank you. I'm Tim Holmes, Holmes, from Helena. I'm a business owner. And I agree with much what's been said this morning. I've been carrying on personal conversations with some of the leaders of Northwestern for several years. And one of the things that really impacts me is the way that is how easily they skate the line between two economic systems, a capitalist system on one hand, and this sort of Soviet style system on the other, where they get guaranteed a profit regardless of what kind of planning they engage in. And we've seen some terrible planning mistakes in a world that is quickly changing. If I was able to do that with our business, I'd love to be able to make stupid mistakes and not be able to not have to pay for them. But in this case, they have known for decades what the world is requiring of them. And yet they keep making the kinds of stupid mistakes that make our future dangerous and unlivable. And I urge you to please hold this company to account for what seems to be an intentional plunging us back into the 19th century. It is really horrifying to me that we can allow a major company that has a monopoly on the market to behave in this way. I've had a pretty good life. I'm an old person. I'm not so worried about my future, but I am really worried about my children, what kind of a world they will live in. And I urge you to hold this company accountable and not approve this rate increase. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Holmes. Appreciate it. All right, our next public commenter is Roxa Reller. Welcome. Please state and spell your name for the record.
Good morning, commissioners, and thank you for your time. My name is Roxa Reller. Last name spelled R-E-L-L-E-R. I'm here on behalf of the Northern Plains Resource Council to ask you not to approve the Northwestern settlement to increase rates. Under this settlement, residential customers will disproportionately shoulder the burden of rate increases. An additional 18% increase on top of the 11% interim rate that has already raised our electric rates by $132, and with more rate increases on the horizon, puts vulnerable Montanans in an extremely difficult position when it's already hard to make ends meet. We've heard a lot of good testimony already this morning about making ends meet. We also know that with this settlement, while Northwestern is withdrawing its request for recovery costs from the Laurel methane plant, there will be a time in the future where Northwestern Energy charges even more to its customers to run the plant by using the PC CAM method. We object to future rate increases happening outside of a rate case proceeding where the public has limited, if any, ability to participate. There's no way that residential customers can keep up with these multiple increases and pay more money on top of this for Northwestern's bad business decisions. Montanans need relief on their energy bills with the costs of living going up. So please keep our interests in mind. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Riller. Isabel Shaeda. Welcome. Please state and spell your name for the record.
Hi, thank you for having me. My name is Isabel Shaeda, Isabel Shaida. You have been hearing testimony all week and this morning now for 40 minutes from Montanans who are begging you to protect us. I almost didn't speak this morning because I thought I have nothing else to add. I echo what people have already said. But then I thought about all the folks who cannot be here to say their truth, their voice, and that the point is not the argument. The point is that we are so many people who will struggle based on just a few percentages of an increase. We are experiencing sky-high housing costs, food costs, gasoline prices, and now energy rates. We are being priced out of our homes, forced to leave our communities and the outdoors we love. In addition to financial strains, we are suffering wildfire, drought. There is stress on crops, cattle, and therefore farmers and ranchers. Our fisheries are being impacted, river closures due to warm water and lack of oxygen, declining snowpack, erratic at best. There is heat stress from the many Montanans that work outdoors, a need for air conditioning that never existed before, as the combination of smoke and heat makes our own living rooms a health hazard. Montanans have a deep connection to our mountains and our plains, and our way of life is inseparable from the outdoors. We have strong community values. We pride ourselves on taking care of each other and our communities and taking care of the land and water. This is the reason I live here. This is the reason my friends here live here. My family lives here, but my community is suffering. And instead of protecting us, we are considering approval of the highest rate hike in Montana history. Why? What are we paying for? A new gas plant when we could be investing in modern energy sources, efficient technologies. The price of wind, for instance, has fallen 70%. Utility solar has gotten 67% cheaper. Utility scale batteries have dropped 73%. But instead, what are we paying for? Ever increasing damage to our health and environment that Northwestern Energy will never have to pay for, but will instead harm everyday Montanans in health and in financial security. Burning fossil fuels kills 100 to 200,000 Americans every year due to pollution. What are we paying for? We are not paying for the health of my future, the health of my community, and the safety of our land. I urge you to consider what you protect here. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Scheider. Michelle Harris. Michelle Harris. Harris, welcome. Please state and spell your name for the record.
Good morning. My name is Michelle Harris, Harris.
Can you speak into the microphone, Ms. Harris?
Good morning. My name is Michelle Harris. It's spelled Harris. I'm here this morning to speak in favor of the Northwestern Energy rate increase. I work for a company called Rocky Mountain Contractors. We're a utility line contractor. We've been in business since the 1950s. We have locations across the state of Montana. Northwestern Energy is Rocky Mountain Contractors' largest customer and has been for many years. We provide construction services to them for both growth and maintenance of their electric and natural gas infrastructure.
The work we perform for Northwestern Energy supports, on average, over 200 of our 300 total Montana-based employees. It allows us to provide quality jobs and long-term career opportunities to our employees, who are then able to reinvest in the communities that they live in. We've heard a lot of testimony about inflation. We all feel it. And I would like to point out that just because Northwestern Energy is a business does not mean that they aren't suffering the impacts of inflation as well and having to deal with them. Keeping Northwestern Energy a healthy, viable, going concern impacts not just them, but lots of others in our communities, such as the people like myself and everyone I work with. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Harris. Eric Neal. Mr. Neal, please come forward. Welcome. Morning.
Morning. Thank you. My last name is Neill, and I'm Vice President of Rocky Mountain Contractors, and I'm a fourth generation Montana, and I'm here to speak in support of Northwestern's rate increase. As you heard from Michelle previously, our company is a local outside line contractor. We employ 300 people, union organization in the state of Montana. Ensuring that Northwestern stays financially viable and healthy is critical to us.
Mr. Neal, can you speak right into the microphone? Thank you.
It is in our best interest to provide the highest quality service to Northwestern at the lowest possible cost. However, the last few years have been particularly challenging to keep our costs down. Fuel and equipment costs, two of our leading expenses, have increased at an even greater rate than the CPI. Because of this, we have been forced to look for price increases from all of our customers, including Northwestern Energy. We're all feeling the effects of inflation and cost increases, and Northwestern Energy's investment in their infrastructure is necessary to provide safe and reliable service to their ratepayer costs. Costs incurred for this investment should be recoverable. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Thanks for coming today. David Merrill. Mr. Merrill, welcome. Please state and spell your name for the record. Speak right into the microphone.
My name is David Merrill. I live in Missoula, Montana. My last name is spelled Merrill. I am here today to speak on behalf of the 8,000 members and supporters of the Montana Sierra Club. Ask yourself if the following sounds like wise stewardship of the hard-earned money of the public. Northwestern Energy is going to be building, Northwestern Energy is likely the only utility in the entire country that's increasing its coal burning capacity. They're building up a gas plant that has not had a zoning authority. And also they are not including the significant financial incentives of the Inflation Reduction Act, other folks have mentioned. Also, the highly regarded Rocky Mountain Institute says that 90% of gas plants being proposed today in the United States will be stranded assets by 2035. 90%, almost all of them. We have to make sure that we don't get into a situation where we're paying for a plant that won't even be operating. Finally, the CEO makes very good money in the millions of dollars every year. The CEO makes more in a week than the average Montana makes in the entire year. So I call on you to deny this rate increase. Thank you.
Thank you for coming to provide public comment today. Is there anybody in the room that has not provided public comment? Please come forward, sir. Please state and spell your name for the record. Speak right into the microphone, please. And good morning.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. My name is Hugh Zackheim, Zackheim, and I'm from Helena. Thanks for the opportunity to comment. I'm going to start off with a bit of poker wisdom. If you look around the table and can't pick out the sucker, you're it, right? Not a comfortable position to be in. This particular game has an additional challenge for the player. Not only does the dealer get to play, the dealer also gets to prearrange the cards before dealing them out. Kind of like Northwestern supplying the numbers in this rate case. So how do we address this? It suggests two ways. First, the Montana public is counting on the PSC to play its assigned role in making sure the ratepayer is treated fairly in this high stakes game. And second, I think we need to look ahead to make sure we don't get in this uncomfortable position in the future. And that is to look at what other states are doing in terms of looking down the line, in terms of changing costs as renewables get cheaper, as fossil fuels get more expensive, as the last speaker pointed out, and really plan regionally for what resources are out there. And I think that's a way that we don't get into this unfair poker game again. So thanks for the opportunity to comment.
Thank you, Mr. Zakheim. Good to see you. Any other public commenters in the room, please step forward. Welcome. Please state and spell your name for the record. Speak right into the microphone.
Hi, my name is Peyton Weaver. That's spelled PAYTONWEAVER. I just want to keep it brief and say that due to the aforementioned public testimony and comment that we heard today, I would urge you guys to vote against this rate increase. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Weaver. Is there anybody else in the room that would like to make public comment this morning? Good morning. Welcome. Please state and spell your name for the record and speak right into the microphone.
Good morning. My name is Jack Larson, JACKLARSON. I do not approve of this rate increase for all the reasons stated before me. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Larson. Are there any other public commenters in the room? Any other public commenters in the room that have not spoken? Okay. Let's try to get to some of the online commenters. Mr. Liebert, I know you tried to publicly comment before. Are you here with us today?
Yes, Mr. Chairman. Can you hear me?
Yes, I can. Welcome, and go ahead and state and spell your name for the record and provide your comment, please.
Okay. All my cows have been waiting, but I'm Richard Liebert, L-I-E-B-E-R-T. I'm a Cascade County cattle rancher and president of the Montana Cattlemen's Association. I'm also a retired Army Lieutenant Colonel and lifelong member of the Disabled American Veterans. And I don't dispute that Northwest Energy needs to increase a rate to cover their operating expenses. And God bless the linemen who come out and keep the poles working. And we've had very little outages out here in farm and ranch country in Cascade County. But this proposal is just staggering. And when I think about my fellow veterans, especially senior veterans in Cascade County, I know hundreds. They're living on very fixed incomes. And I God bless the fact that I have a retired Army income retirement, and also I own property and have a ranch, but this is just way too much, and it's staggering. And I want to think about what we did in the 1930s. We had a rural utility service that was a game changer. I think, and I was listening to the discussion before about transmission and grids and things like that. And I'd like Northwest Energy to do more to help us with net metering, because I'd like to put some solar panels, if I can cost it out, on my calving barn. And I think we need to be an exporter of energy. I'm an old colonel. We need to go on the offense instead of defense and stop whining. And we could have been doing this 20 years ago. The BPA, the intertie lines, all these things, we were talking about this 20 years ago. I was interested in wind farms back then. 2006, we built 6 wind turbines, United Materials in 2006. We should have 60 in Cascade County. We should be exporting. So right now we're operating with a busted down 2-lane road to get our power out and even get the power in. We shouldn't be importing. We should be producing power. In Montana, we're proud to send the best grain, the best cattle on a 4-lane interstate system. We should have been doing this, and we can still do this with federal cooperation, cooperate with the investors and capital and get this done. I find it interesting also the price of natural gas is coming down on the futures market. So I hope that's figured into the rate increases as well. And when I look at the futures market, it goes from $3 to $9, but I think we can do better than that when they're looking at where we can go with this. But like I said, I don't mind paying 8 to 10% to help the linemen. God bless them. But I look at where is the vision to do more to expand our grid to do these things, and we need to be exporting power and help those wind farms that are going to replace Colstrip 1 and 2 over on the eastern side of the state, use the existing transmission lines. And finally, when I visit Oklahoma and Texas, I got family down there, and go through Wyoming, you see wind farms everywhere. And those aren't exactly liberal states either. So they figured out how to do it. And you see images of, pump jacks pulling up oil, you see wind farms, and then you see cattle there too. So let's have a better vision. Let's go on the offense. And I don't mind a modest increase, but not what's proposed. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Liebert, and thank you for your service. Next online commenter is Brett Doney. Brett, are you with us?
Good morning. I'm Brett Doney, BRETTDONEY. I lead the Great Falls Development Authority. We're an economic development, community development financial institution that serves Great Falls and the surrounding Golden Triangle region. And our investors of over 150 businesses and community organizations are some of the biggest power users and payers in the region. The core of our economic development strategy is to close the gap between wages and cost of living, and we've been making progress on that. Why we're supporting this rate increase would seem to make it more difficult to close that gap, and that is true. But reliability of power and availability of power are very crucial considerations for what we're trying to do in building our manufacturing base and trying to compete with surrounding provinces and states, particularly when it comes to value-added agriculture, food processing, ag processing, bioprocessing. I don't think any community was more skeptical of Northwestern Energy than Great Falls if you go back a couple of decades. But we've worked closely with them. We've watched them. We've worked with them on the Matta line, on hydro projects, wind projects, solar projects, and more recently on some constraints in transmission capacity. We're very concerned about the transmission capability in our region, both for electricity and natural gas. We had a very large natural resource proposed plant in Great Falls that would have invested over $900 million, used a Montana natural resource. And we couldn't guarantee that there was transmission capacity for the second phase of their project. So I think this is a necessary step. We're all in this together. We don't want to pay more in energy. No one does, but there is no magical solution. So we think this is necessary to get caught up, and we look forward to working with Northwestern, working with the commission to look at some of these transmission constraints that are actually holding up not only manufacturing, but we want to produce more renewable energy. We'd like to be an exporter of energy, and there's tremendous wind and solar and more hydro capacity in our region and elsewhere in the state. But if we don't invest in a robust capacity, we're not going to be able to pursue those opportunities. Thank you for this opportunity. I'm sorry I couldn't be down there this morning to be there in person.
All right, thank you, Mr. Doney. Our next public commenter is John Kessler. Mr. Kessler, are you online? Mr. Kessler, can you hear us?
Yeah, I can hear you. Can you hear me now?
Yes, we can. Go ahead.
So my name is John Kessler, John Kessler. I live in Billings, Montana, and I'm a staff representative for the United Steelworkers Union. We represent roughly 1,900 employees in Montana through various industries, including oil and gas. I want to voice our support for Northwestern Energy as they participate in this rate review. Northwestern Energy has shown a commitment to Montana by investing in infrastructure related to natural gas and electricity, two items that most people take for granted. This rate review has the potential to further investments into infrastructure, increasing the reliability of supplying energy to homes and businesses, and also to create more jobs. We have a good working relationship with Northwestern Energy and look forward to helping the company create good paying jobs and deliver safe and reliable energy for the hardworking people of Montana. Thank you for your time and your service to the state of Montana.
Thank you, Mr. Kessler, for participating today. Our next online commenter is Winona Bateman. Winona, are you with us?
Yes, can you hear me?
Yes, we can. Please state and spell your name for the record.
Thank you. My name is Winona Bateman, Winona Bateman, and I reside in Missoula, Montana. Good morning, commissioners, and thank you for this opportunity to speak. I wish I could be there today. I'm a mom, and I'm always on looking for savings, comparing prices between companies. In Missoula, we recently had a new trash service pop up. They're locally owned, they're run by veterans, they're wonderful, and I saved $50 a month because I switched from the other company. I wish I could do that for my electric and gas service, but I can't. Northwestern Energy's leadership is requesting a 28% rate increase for electricity and an 11% increase for gas to be applied to rate-paying Montana families. I urge you to deny this rate increase, which is neither fair nor reasonable or necessary. Through their current integrated resource planning process, Northwestern Energy could take advantage of federal dollars to transition to clean and renewable energy through the Inflation Reduction Act. Doing so would reduce our costs, reduce our carbon pollution, bring jobs and tax dollars to rural Montana communities, and increase reliability. According to an analysis by Vibrant Clean Energy, at least 17 counties in Montana could benefit from this opportunity. Newly built renewable power plants qualify for a tax credit of up to 50% when built in communities where there is economic need and a fossil fuel industry. This means we can reduce our costs long-term and support fossil fuel workers in the transition. Neighboring states such as Idaho, North Dakota, and Wyoming are jumping at this opportunity. Montana is 5th in the nation for wind potential, and we are on par with Germany for solar potential. Why wouldn't we use these plentiful and clean resources to secure our statewide grid and reduce our costs? As I understand it, Northwestern Energy is guaranteed a 10% rate of return on what they build for energy generation. They profit no matter what. Their financial health is guaranteed. The only question is, will Montana families be hung out to dry? That's where you come in. You are on the front lines of this cost crisis for Montanans, and you can make a difference in your constituents' lives. It's clear that Northwestern Energy's leadership has an opportunity with their upcoming integrated resource plan to save Montanans money if they embrace the IRA opportunities. Please deny this rate increase and demand that Northwestern's leadership do better. If they can't figure it out, instead of hanging Montana families, students, and workers out to dry, simply ask Northwestern to reduce shareholder profits and cut their executives' pay. Thank you.
Thank you. Are there any other public commenters online? Seeing none. All right, I'm going to circle back to two folks to see if they're here. Janice Morrow. Janice Morrow. Joan Montaigne. Joan Montaigne. Okay, that ends our public comment for this morning. Thank you for everybody who drove up from Bozeman or came from Missoula or came from Helena for taking the time to provide public comment today. We appreciate it. Okay, parties, I think what we'll do before we go back into the evidentiary record, why don't we take 12 minutes, have everybody regroup, and then we'll hit it hard starting at 10:15. We will go off the record. Commissioner Pinochi, are you still on?
I'm here.
Okay, well, we'll get started here in about 2 minutes, Commissioner Pinochi, and we'll pick up with you.
Thank you.
All right, 1 minute warning for everybody. All right, time is now 10:15 a.m. We will move out of the public comment portion. Well, we'll go back on the record and then we'll move out of the public comment portion of this proceeding and move back into the evidentiary record. In this matter, where we had left off was Commissioner Pinochi was questioning Northwest Energy witness Mike Cashel. Commissioner Pinochi.
Thank you, Mr. President. So a little recap where we were is we're taking a look at the idea of adding transmission to Bonneville to avoid creating more capacity, that would fix our problems. But the point of view to balance that is if we produce more energy, create new generation in Montana, I believe we'll meet the safety factor at a greater degree, because if we reach out for power from out of state, because Montana doesn't produce enough and it's not there, we'll have a safety factor, because if we can't bring in energy during the winter time, this will be dangerous. Reliability. We're going to have less outages if we produce more energy in the state. We have a greater safety against that because we produce energy to the amount that we need where we currently don't. Affordable. We meet these goals because when we bring energy from out of state at a time where it's in high demand, the price can be 10 times higher or more. If we produce more than we need, we ensure a lower price. So my question to Mr. Cashel is, do you agree with this?
Thank you, Commissioner Pinochi. I think you laid that foundation before we broke. So my answer at the time was I think there's a healthy mix of both in-state generation, and obviously without the transmission systems that we have today, we wouldn't be able to serve our customers. So and at the end of my rebuttal testimony, what I indicated was that planning to serve our customers with only one type of resource or transmission over generation, it's not prudent planning. And so it's a healthy mix of all of those. Today, we have a very significant deficiency in generation capacity that's able to meet our peak needs. So of course, that's high on our list of desires. In addition to that, we have been investing heavily in our transmission system so we can deliver safe and reliable energy to our customers, as you pointed out.
Let's talk a little bit about transmission. A few years ago, the Public Service Commission opened a high efficiency docket to encourage high efficiency use. One of the ideas and a bill that was introduced as a result of that was House Bill 729, which encourages the use of high performance conductors or power lines for those that would like to hear power lines in use over high performance conductors. Now, folks, what this means is that the new high performance power lines or conductors will radiate less electricity electricity leaks out of a power line similar to a garden hose with holes in it. By using the high performance, high efficiency power lines, we cut that line loss by 1/3. But there's something else. The high performance conductors can carry twice the amount of electricity with the same size line, which means we can double our capacity with any transmission line without modifying the power poles, which means we can avoid permitting of putting in new structures or power poles or power structures to hold these lines up. This bill, they tell me, is the leading high efficiency power line bill in the country. And I think Northwest Energy could choose to be a leader in the United States by implementing these new types of power lines, thus doubling the capacity of any of our transmission without modifying the structures. And Northwestern has already installed one of these lines between Great Falls and Monarch. Do you feel, Mr. Cashel, that these high performance power lines can play a key role in improving transmission in Montana?
Thank you, Commissioner Pinocchio. I always appreciate your requests and discussion regarding transmission and specifically high efficiency transmission. As you pointed out, we have been using the high efficiency transmission where it makes sense. We've installed these type of conductors in the Billings area, and as you pointed out in the Great Falls, actually from basically the Monarch area in that area. But one thing I would like to point out is that it was true in our installation. We actually had to change all of the structures out in the Monarch area as well in order to accommodate the new conductor. So not in all cases are you able to utilize the existing structure. That was an older line. It needed to be upgraded in order to carry the high efficiency conductor. Actually, in order to carry any conductor, it needed to be upgraded. So I agree with you that there's a place for high efficiency conductors. We've used them. We'll continue to use them where it makes sense. We look at that as one of our alternatives all the time. But I do caution that we won't avoid permitting necessarily in all cases, and we won't necessarily avoid changing structures or other connection devices and other hardware on the system. But they certainly have their place, and we're a big fan of that kind of technology.
Let's talk a little bit about the greater share of Colstrip, which has 500 kV lines between Colstrip and, say, Washington. If you get a greater share of Colstrip, will you have a greater use of those 500 kV lines that travel through Idaho on into Washington?
So I guess I'd answer that question by saying that the Colstrip transmission system is extremely important for service to our customers. And it's designed to carry, of course, around 2,000 megawatts, which includes essentially the capacity that Colstrip was capable of. But it also carries other energy. It carries energy from wind developments in Montana. It also carries hydro generation. It's a very important facility for us for imports, as I alluded to earlier. The 500 kV system is part of the largest interface we have with any other electrical system. So it's really, really important for us in general. So thank you for bringing up the Colstrip transmission system.
I talked to a couple of engineers in transmission, and they feel that if we were to replace the power lines from Colstrip to Washington with the high performance conductor, that we could increase the capacity from 500 kW to 750 kW. The state of Washington has passed legislation that says they will only accept clean energy. So if we increase the transmission line by simply replacing the line, we could increase capacity dramatically and be able to export power, say wind energy, to the state of Washington. Is that something that we could feasibly do in the future?
So you bring up a lot of complex issues there. First of all, one of the things that's interesting about the Western transmission system is it's typically stability limited. And what I mean by that is it's really not the thermal capability of any one transmission line that dictates the overall capacity that it's capable of producing. It's really the integration into the rest of the system that suggest what the limitation might be on one circuit. The 500 kV system is similar. The system that's built around the 500 kV system and the region, in order for us to actually increase the capacity out of Montana, and I touched on this yesterday, there'd have to be a lot of associated work, including substation work in our system, beyond in Bonneville's system. So this is one of the cases that I referred to, that changing the conductor by itself wouldn't necessarily, without other upgrades on the system, increase the capacity. But it could be part of a longer term solution for sure. And again, I think anytime we have the opportunity to use high efficiency or new efficient facilities, we should be contemplating that. But the
Well, I
other thing
think
I'd say about the 500 kV system, by the way, is that the conductor is in really, really good shape. By transmission aging, it's not very old. It was put in place in the 80s, and it's in very, very good shape. And to actually replace the conductor on that system would be very expensive right now, and it really isn't necessary. So the other thing we have to look at is, when would you do something like replacing the conductor on the 500 kV system? It's definitely a matter of, is it through its useful life yet? Is there other reasons to change it? Those sorts of things. And right now, the 500 kV system really is in very, very good condition.
Well, I'm glad you brought that up. So let's practice that a bit. Let's say you're in the Walmart store and you pass some LED light bulbs, and you pick up the box and it says, if you use an LED light bulb, you can save up to $400 in the life of this bulb. And you ask yourself, well, I just put in a brand new light bulb that's the old incandescent, but I'm going to lose the savings if I don't change this bulb out. Now, if we can cut the line loss by a third, the people in the industry tell me those lines can pay for themselves in 5 years. Then the question becomes, are we spending more money by using a line that's in good condition and still has service life left? Or do we have more to gain to replace that with a high efficiency power line? And there are some other factors. The high efficiency power lines can double the capacity with the same size line, which means that we are hardening the grid for growth, but they also cut down on fires because the new carbon core resists, or it won't allow the line to sag, which is a cause of fires and outages. The pile of paperwork in front of Jennifer Fielder is pretty massive. And if you go through it, you're going to find all kinds of paperwork and statements concerning fire mitigation and fire risk. If we use the high efficiency power line with the carbon core, we cut fires, they say, probable to 50%. Keep in mind, the fires in California cost $1 billion of damage and the power company went bankrupt. By hardening the grid, cutting our line loss by a third, if we have one major forest fire that costs, say, $50 million, and in Montana that can certainly be feasible with our large forested areas, is it possible that if we're not using the high efficiency power lines now, that we're losing money, even though there's service life left in those conductors we currently use?
Again, thank you for the great question. A lot of complex stuff there that you mentioned. I guess I would say this, the commission is very aware, we have formed a fire mitigation team. We have a fire mitigation program and an enhanced fire mitigation program, actually, because we've been working on this for quite some time. And part of that is to determine, what's the best structure for not only the operational team, but then what are our capital plans going forward. Situational awareness is certainly very important from a fire mitigation standpoint, and then planning carefully over a longer period of time, what kind of capital upgrades, conductor changes, construction changes, those kinds of things that you may want to do in order to mitigate fire is very, very important to us, and the potential for fire. And we're several years into that already. I guess the other thing I would say is that what you're talking about, I think, is there value in utilizing more you having more utilization of efficient transmission lines and conductors. I think it all comes down to economic analysis when putting aside for a moment the fire mitigation issues, but it really is an economic decision, and utilizing new technology when you are faced with replacing other transmission conductors that have run their useful life, or you have a reason to change them for another reason, it just makes good sense. But it's really an incremental approach that's important. To take on a holistic, complete change of our conductors from what exists today to high efficiency conductors would be very expensive. And, one of the things we're here for today is rate filing, and that rate filing necessarily increases costs. So one of the things we have to do as a prudent utility is to determine how aggressively we're going to upgrade our systems so that we can manage impact on our customers, certainly with regard to rate increases. So an incremental approach is what I would recommend there.
I'm glad you brought that up. So let's practice that a little bit. So I think what the ratepayer is wanting to know is, if we're going to see this large increase, can Northwestern Energy make investments with this additional money that will cause rates to possibly go down in the future? I believe the answer to that is yes. If we implement high efficiency conductors, high efficiency transformers, and start making decisions with a future that's going to be more economically viable. Now, I think Mr. Cashel is absolutely correct. There's no way that we can replace all of the high efficiency power lines at once. So here's a plan that I'd like to practice with you. We take a look at the power lines and the transmission lines that are near capacity, the ones that have to be improved. And we say, those are the ones that we have to replace first, because we can double the capacity with the same size power line. We'll also improve the fire hazard, cutting fires by, we hope, half. We're also going to cut the line loss by a third. So I think when we look at the transmission across the state of Montana, the first low-hanging fruit are the transmission lines that need to be upgraded, that we replace those to the high efficiency power lines first. Does this analogy seem like it's a good fit? And do you think with this rate increase that we can target this type of thinking? What are your thoughts, Mr. Cashel, on that?
Well, I'd say we're generally in agreement on how we would prioritize utilizing new conductors on our system. We actually do exactly what you're describing, which is to prioritize those needs that are the greatest in order to determine where are we going to expend our capital dollars. And so I think we're in agreement on the notion.
Let's take a look about some questions a couple of days ago where somebody brought up that we have to become more carbon free. And I had made it clear that Montana has cut their carbon by nearly 70%. Half of Colstrip has been shut down. The Sydney coal-fired plant has been shut down. Montana is really a leader in clean energy in the United States today, and we could further that goal by being a leader in high-efficiency conductor use, which is exactly what House Bill 729 was designed to do. By the way, everyone, House Bill 729 passed the Senate yesterday with 100% of the vote. What a success. And I want to congratulate everyone on that great move. I believe if Northwestern can implement the high efficiency power line, coupled with the fact that we've cut our carbon emissions by more than half, that we could be a leader in the United States on high efficiency conductor use while cutting carbon. With that, Mr. President, I have no more questions.
Thank you, Commissioner Pinochi. Commissioner Bukacek.
Mr. President, I have a few questions. I think that you deferred to Joe Steinmetz as far as the financial cost of integration of variable generation sources such as solar and wind for balancing. You deferred that to him. And I think that's one of the most important things when we, in terms of your company, for making the determination in our rate review. And I'm hoping that some of the public commenters can stick around to get that information from him. Because I think we can have, more meaningful conversations, understanding if we have a greater depth of understanding than what is in the newspapers in Montana. So I have a more general question for you that has to do with the decreased efficiency and increased cost when we integrate solar and wind. And I have a rudimentary understanding of it. I liken it to when we're driving our vehicle we're taking long-term out in the country on the highway versus stop and go in town. And when we do those two different types of travel, of course, it's less costly and more efficient when we're going straight along. And my understanding is when we integrate solar and wind, that we have to use a lot more gas to natural gas to fill in the gaps when they are up and down. That's my rudimentary understanding of why it's less efficient and more costly to use wind and solar. And I was wondering if you would be the person to fill us in on more details.
Okay, that's a very good question as well. And I can give you my perspective from the transmission system, and then that's probably another good question to carry on with Joe, Mr. Steinmetz. So I think your analogy is a good one. The ignoring for a moment the overall cost of the resource itself, but certainly when you consider the fact that wind and solar is variable, we have to have other resources that fill in those gaps. And I want to make sure that this is clear as well. Wind and solar is a great source of energy. When the energy is available, it's usable to us. In fact, at sometimes we have way more wind and solar than we can manage, and it has to be exported off of our system. So it's a really good source of energy. It's not a good source of capacity, and capacity is that form of energy that's there and ready to be used when it's needed. So because of that, we have to have something to fill in the gaps. And it's either, in our case, we have contracts that, again, Mr. Steinmetz can probably give you a little more detail on that. Contracts with other providers, they come at a cost as well. Contracts with other providers. We have our Dave Gates Generation Station, our Basin Creek Generation Station, which are both gas fired. We actually do move coal strip to help with integration, and our hydro system as well to a smaller degree. It has some capability. So your analogy is a very good one, that there's additional costs that are introduced when you're stopping and starting, as opposed to when you're just kind of tooling down the highway at a normal steady speed. It's a very good analogy.
Thank you. No more questions.
Thank you, Commissioner Bukacek. I don't have any questions for this witness. Mr. Hamilton?
No questions, Mr. President.
Okay, thank you, commissioners. Ms. Trinnell, recross? Yes, of course.
I wanted to ask about ADD 1 and your testimony. So if you don't have that in front of you, if you could get that exhibit.
Did you say ADD 1?
Yeah, Durkin's exhibit. It's a spreadsheet. And I think following up, first of all, good morning, Mike. How are you?
Good morning. Thank you.
Thank you. So to follow up on some of the commissioner questions about some of the drivers of the costs and the inputs here, I wanted to just kind of frame this and make sure we're all on the same page in the context here. So I'm going to just put down in the stipulation from the paragraphs 1, 10, and 13. And you've been in the room when we've been talking about the total increase here that's being requested.
Yes, I've been in the room.
Okay, so we have the 81.9, the 18.2, which is about 100, plus the PCAM differential, which is about 69. So we've been using the number of a total rate increase of $150 million. But if you add those together from the stipulation, we're at about 169, right?
Yeah, while I was paying attention somewhat to the discussion, I'm certainly not the expert on the numbers in the settlement agreement.
Okay. What I want to ask you about is a transmission component of that.
Okay.
And so if you look at ADD 1, of this 169 million that's in front of the commission to make a decision about how much money does a transmission contribute to this 169 in terms of what I was looking at in the ADD 1 was the transmission, the annual revenue requirement. And if that's not the right number to be using as a comparative metric here, maybe you can help me out.
I'm not sure that you can very easily go from this statement ADD 1 to revenue requirement in total. So I'm not sure that I can answer that question looking at this.
Okay, I was looking at your testimony, and at page 24 of your testimony, you're talking about the jurisdictional cost study.
24?
Yeah, page 24. I'll wait till you get there.
Okay.
And at lines 10 to 11, you say the jurisdictional cost study calculates about 58 million as a rate schedule revenue required from FERC customers.
Sure.
So can you help me? What I'm trying to do is get to what is the transmission component of the total dollars that are in front of the commission to make a decision about in this case? Is that a fair question?
Yes.
Okay.
It might take me a moment to answer it though, because it's the way the revenue requirement is calculated for transmission is the same way that for retail rates is the same way that revenue requirement is calculated for distribution or generation. And that is all the plant that's required and the costs of service to make that up. That's a different number than MRC 24. What MRC 24 is either there's two numbers there on line 10. This jurisdictional cost study was a calculation, a methodology that was intended to determine how much of the revenue requirement calculated for this case was actually attributable to our FERC customers. So it was an allocation among jurisdictions. That was the $58.6 million. And the complexity of that I won't get into, but it was supposed to represent how much of the overall transmission revenue requirement could be expected or should be expected to be recovered from our FERC customers.
Okay. And then I was actually going to maybe direct you to MRC page 11,
okay.
Which is the total investments that you've made. And your testimony at line 20 is that you've added 233 million less retirements.
That's right.
So that would drive the number that's going to be the cost recovery being sought here. Is that right?
So the $233 million worth of investments that we've made since the last rate case is a portion of the revenue requirement. It by itself is not. It's a portion that contributes to the overall rate base for transmission. Does not include the costs of operating the transmission system. So I'm sure there's a table somewhere that actually breaks this down, but I don't have it at my fingertips. But that is a portion of it. Our overall rate base for transmission is much higher than 233 million. That's just a piece of it.
Right. So how do we get, do you know what that number is off the top of your head? Do you have a rough?
No, I don't know what the portion of the settled revenue requirement is attributable to transmission.
Is it somewhere? Was it broken out as part of this stipulation?
That I don't know if it was broken out or not specifically.
Is that information that you could get to us?
I'd actually have to ask someone else. I don't know the answer to that question.
Okay, I think that would be helpful to have an understanding of what the transmission component of this is, Mr. President, if it would be okay. And maybe if you want to kick that to Mr. Pankratz or somebody else, maybe another witness, I'd just like that information in the record somewhere if we can get it.
Does Northwestern have another identified witness perhaps in mind for this question?
Yes, Mr. President, probably not today, but on Monday, we will have our finance team up And so either Ms. Lael or Mr. Brazina, who speaks to rate base, or Ms. Rich, who speaks to the O&M and the revenue requirement derivation.
Does that work for you?
Sure. Thank
Okay.
you, Mr. President, and I'll move on. So in answer to one of the questions from the commissioners, I think you said that, and correct me if I've mischaracterized this, but I thought I heard you say not planning to serve our load with resources we control is a risky path to take. Is that accurate? Did I capture that correctly?
I think that's a good paraphrasing of a portion of what I said.
Okay. So I want to ask you about what you meant there. So by planning to serve load with resources, when you say we, I assume you mean Northwestern.
That's correct.
Okay. And when you say control, do you mean own?
In part, I guess, let me expand on that. I mean, the real concern that I have as a transmission operator and a balancing authority operator and all the folks that work to make that happen is that it's really, really difficult and, in my view, risky to rely on so many resources that are outside of our balancing authority and have to be imported on our system. The short-term nature of that lack of planning, I guess, is what really is concerning to me. And furthermore, when you look at how the systems were developed over time, and I think we established yesterday that transmission development takes a very long time, but the transmission system and the generation system were developed together over decades. And now it's changing very, very fast as the generation system changes very, very quickly. So that's my concern, is we had a system that was founded on having significant generations resources within Montana, and a transmission system was built around that. And the rapid change that we're seeing, not only in Montana, but in the entire West, makes it very difficult to serve our growing load without good planning and also resources that are closer to our loads. Does that help?
It does, but I want to parse that a little bit. So, and I think that you're kind of wearing the hat of transmission here, but you're also talking about generation. So I guess one of the questions I really have for you is, when you are talking about the importance of planning, that means planning both on the transmission side of the house as well as the generation side of the house, correct?
That's right. From my perspective, the generation system and the transmission system are both critical to actually serving our balancing authority and all of our customers. So yes, you're right.
And since Northwestern has become a fully integrated utility, this is only the second rate case you've had as a fully integrated utility, correct?
Well, I remember the last rate case was 2018. I don't remember the one prior to that, but I guess I would argue that we're not fully integrated yet.
Okay.
And that is that we still, unlike all of our peers who have been operating in an environment where they plan generation, transmission, and distribution together for decades, there was a period of time where generation was absent from Northwestern's portfolio for the most part. So we're still rebuilding what I'll call a vertically integrated system. We can't serve our customers without heavy reliance on other systems at this point.
Okay, I believe that you testified in response to a commissioner question that the money that is before the commission to make a decision on in this case, I think you said there was no additional generation resources that are in front of the commission in this case.
I think the question that I received was, are there generation resources in front of this group today that were related to additional generation resources related to integration of renewables?
Okay, is part of the gas plant in Laurel, is part of the cost of that in this case?
So I'm probably not the right one to answer that question. I'll answer it with my general knowledge. And
I mean, if you don't know, that's fair. That's fair.
Yeah.
We can move on.
I think I'll pass on.
Okay, thanks. Fair enough. So getting back to control versus ownership, I guess my question is, and I don't think I heard you answer it. By control, when you say Northwestern wants to control resources to eliminate risk, by control, do you mean ownership?
Yes, for the most part, I do. I will point out that we have one facility in our fleet that is a gas fire generation facility that we don't own, but we control the entire operation of it. We dictate how it operates, and that's the Basin Creek generation resource. And so that's not ideal because we don't control when maintenance is done on it. We don't control capital upgrades to it. We only have a contract for its output. So I think in my mind, from a holistic standpoint, the best way for us to plan in the future is to have the ability to plan everything, including generation, transmission, and distribution, and how it's maintained over time.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Cashel. Were you here yesterday when Mr. Byrd testified?
Mr. Byrd?
Yeah.
Yes, I was.
Okay, and I asked him a question about who owned Northwestern Energy, and did you hear his answer to that question?
I did hear Mr. Byrd's answer, yes.
Okay, and are you familiar with the very recent docket in which there was a restructuring of Northwestern Energy?
That's not my area of expertise. I'm generally familiar with it.
Okay, so Mr. Byrd testified that Northwestern, and I'm going to draw a box right here, is owned. I asked him who the top 5 investors were, and he said BlackRock is one of them. Did you hear that testimony?
Mr. Chairman, I'm going to object to this line of questioning because it's not clear to me the relevance and it's clearly outside the scope of Mr. Cashel's testimony.
Mr. President, if you'll allow me a couple of questions here, where this is going is ownership, control, and risk management, which is directly related to the financial issues that are before the commission to make a decision about.
So, Mr. Nell, I think Mr. Byrd was probably the most relevant witness for those issues, but I'm going to give you some leeway on this.
Thank you, Mr. President. This won't take long, and it follows just directly on his answer to my question of an integrated utility.
Please try to tie it into some kind of
Thank you.
transmission.
Thank you. Thank you. So we're talking about what is now the holding company of Northwestern, and then the Montana utility down here, which I think you just testified it would be, I don't want to put words in your mouth, but your perfect world, or it would be the generation, the transmission, and the distribution would all be owned by one company.
Mr. Chairman, again, I'm going to object. Mr. Cashel did not indicate that he knew about the holding company docket. And the question is assuming facts not in evidence.
Mr. Nell.
Well, I'm asking him about this Montana. What was my question? I think can you read my question back?
Can you read the question back, please?
Well, we can move on. My question here now is, for purposes of control and ownership, what you would like Northwestern to own is the transmission, the generation, and the distribution. Is that correct?
Maybe I should clarify. I was speaking from an operational standpoint.
Okay.
And a planning standpoint.
Okay.
All of our peers and the industry in general, utilities own, operate, maintain, construct the generation, transmission, and distribution as a system.
Okay. But when you construct those, it costs money and we pay for it, right?
We have an obligation to serve. So as we develop systems to serve the customers, this is a process by which, yes.
Yeah, that's why we're
customers pay
here.
for this.
That's why we're here.
Yes.
Okay. So we're going to pay some dollars to this for and some portion of that's going to be for transmission, right? And we're going to send our dollars up to this investor-owned utility, which is now held by a parent company in New York, right?
Again,
That's how
Mr.
this structure is set up, Mr. Cashel?
I
Well,
will
hold on.
object. It's mischaracterizing Northwestern's plans for the future with respect to the holding company and assumes facts not in evidence is clearly outside the scope of Mr. Cashel's testimony.
I'm gonna sustain this objection, Ms. Janelle.
Okay,
I think the point you're trying to make is that any profits would go to Northwestern shareholders. Is that?
no, Mr. President, and I would like to make an offer of proof if I'm going to get cut off here.
I'm not cutting you off. I'm just
Okay.
Sustaining the objection to the single question.
Okay,
So please try to limit your questioning to the area of expertise
okay,
Mr. Cashel is testifying on, and please limit it to the testimony that he submitted in this matter.
okay. So we're talking about ownership, control, and risk and resource acquisition and paying for them and whether or not that's a just and reasonable process. And so trying to get to you're acquiring transmission resources, that's going to cost us money and we're going to pay it to where the ratepayers of Montana, our money goes upstream to this company. If things all go south here in Montana and the resources that you're acquiring, the gas plant to serve this peak load that you're talking about, if that's not a good investment, then this Montana utility, us Montanans, get stuck holding the bag for the investments that you make if they're not good ones, correct?
Mr. Chairman, I renew my objections.
Mr. Cashel, do you feel qualified to answer that question?
No, I'm not the appropriate witness for that question.
Okay.
Okay, I'll move on, Mr. President. I had an exhibit that I marked, and this is in relationship and following up on the questions, Mike, that you were asked about the peak event in December of 2021. And so I'd marked an exhibit 350 Montana 28 that I emailed around. And I can place my copy in front of you with my computer, if that would be all right, Mr. President.
Yes, that'd be fine.
Mr. President, if I may, given what Ms. Trinnell just said about emailing it around, I will need time to pull that up, get onto your internet and so forth. So maybe if we could take a couple minute break to allow for that.
I had asked for it to be printed as well, and I don't know if that happened. Do you have a copy?
Do we have enough copies, Mr. Hamilton?
May I approach or
Okay, so hold on, everybody. We'll do, time is now 10:56 a.m. We will go off the record at this point in time. We will reconvene 11:05. All right, the time is now 11:05 a.m. We are back on the record. Where we left off was some discussion about the parties having what has been marked as 350 Montana Exhibit 28. Do all the parties have a copy of this document at this point in time? I would also note for the record that this document, black and white in the handout, but it is in color on the screens here at the Public Service Commission. Ms. Trinnell, your witness.
Thank you, Mr. President. And just to wrap up the discussion we were having just before we broke, Mike, I just want to ask, isn't it true that when you talk about risk for Northwestern, what you're really talking about is financial risk for the investors? That's what risk is for the investors of Northwestern, is financial risk, right?
No, that's not at all what I was talking about. I was talking about the risk, operational risk of serving Northwestern's customers from our generation and transmission distribution systems. The
Okay.
operational risk. I didn't say anything at all about financial risk.
Okay, fair enough. Important to separate and address both of those, correct? Operational being an important component of risk and financial risk also being an important component of risk.
My testimony was all about operational risk.
Okay, thank you. And so you had talked in your testimony and in response to some of the commissioner questions earlier about this. I don't think you used the word peak event in December of 2021, but an event in December of 2021, correct?
Yes.
Okay.
It was definitely a peak event.
Okay.
In your words, yes. Very, very much so.
How would you describe it?
I agree with you. It was a peak event.
Okay. So do you use U.S. Energy Information Administration data? Are you familiar with it? And do you use it?
I don't use this data at all. No.
Okay. Are you familiar with the EIA website and that it reports out graphs of energy data?
I am, and it's actually a source of a lot of confusion.
Okay.
Because the way they report out is not accurate in my view.
Okay.
Compared to what we actually experience.
Okay, good. Well, I've handed you what's been marked as 350 Exhibit 28, which is a printout of the event that you discussed in December of 2021. And it's also up on the screen in color. And Mike, can you tell us what, as we're looking at this chart here, which is page 2 of 350 Montana 28, what is the yellow line on this
So,
chart?
Mr. Cashel, before you answer this, because your head's going to be turned, you're going to have to move your microphone closer to you. All right, thank you.
So having just received this, other than the labels that are on the graph, I don't know what this is, and it's confusing to me. The vertical column is supposedly megawatt hours, which doesn't make sense in the context I think about our system. I understand the dates, obviously, but I'd have to understand the data that went behind this. And here's my concern. Most often what happens is this report includes, this data set includes resources that are not available to Northwestern to utilize to serve its load. And that's what this looks like a little bit to me, is that there's resources that aren't in our balancing authority that are actually appearing in this set of data. But I can't confirm that because I don't have the data.
Okay, so if you go to page 1 of this, and that is the balancing authority, those are all of the members of your balancing authority. If you see that down on the bottom, do you see that?
Can you page up?
I can, if it's more helpful, I can put the exhibit right in front of you on my computer if that's helpful.
It might be useful though, so that the rest of the folks can see it as well.
I'm not sure I can. I can go back and forth.
There we go.
Oh, do you want to do that one?
That's the one you were referring to, is that right?
Yep.
And so your question again, please.
So those are the members in Northwestern's balancing authority, correct?
No, They're not the members of the balancing authority. What that suggests, again, I haven't seen the data, but that suggests the parties that we interconnect with.
Okay, it's the interchange with the title of the document is Northwestern's interchange with neighboring balancing authorities in December of 21.
Right.
Okay. And really my question, Mike, is looking at these two graphs of December of 2021, what I'm trying to drill down into what this event was. And really my question is, that was a 1-day event out of a month that shows a sort of a different kind of pattern. Is that fair to say that?
Mr. Chairman, I'm going to object as it mischaracterizes Mr. Cashel's testimony. He spoke to an event in December of 22 that was multiple days, not December of 21.
Mr. Fennell?
I thought you had talked about December of 21. I apologize if this is.
No, and thank you for pointing that out. When you said December of 22, it didn't even click to me that was 21. But yes, I was referring to December of 22. This just a few months ago was a very significant event.
Okay. In December of 2021, which this shows a singular drop in December of 2021, right?
Mr. Chairman, I'm going to object because this is outside the scope of the commissioner questions.
So I'm going to tie this in, Mr. President, and I'll move on from the chart.
I'm going to overrule for now, but Mr. Nell, I do want to caution you that the witness did testify to the December 2022 event in questioning. So, but please proceed.
Okay, let me follow up because I think it's important. We're trying to get accurate information. So in the December 2022 event, how many days of the month was that event?
So can I ask you a question that might be helpful for me to understand this? If we went back up to the previous slide, and this will illustrate my concern with the data, okay? The green line, it's marked BPAT, which is our interface with Bonneville Power Administration. And ignoring for the moment the left-hand column, because I'm not sure megawatt hours is the right representation. But that shows, and again, if the nomenclature is what I think it is that an export to BPAT that's supposed to be representing?
So what so on the EIA graph, and this is my question to you, is that's the net export. That's the total interchange. And that was my question to you is what are we looking at when we're looking at this?
Okay, and that's why I wanted to try to clarify, because in the bulk electric system, minus is an import, plus is an export. So if they're not following the same nomenclature, I can't tell exactly what that is. If that is suggested to be an export, then I would say that includes lots of generation that's not Northwestern's and not in our BA.
Okay, which could be attributable to Colstrip, right?
It could be.
Okay.
But I would say that, in fact, it's consistent with my exhibit on MRC 21. And that is specifically MRC 21, the exhibit there is our net scheduled interchange, which is in theory, I guess, if that's supposed to be net scheduled interchange, one of those numbers is.
MRC 21, let me get there.
And while you're looking, that chart shows a kind of a gray line. It says NWMT total interchange.
Right.
And I can't see which one of those lines it is, but if all those were added together, we're overwhelmingly a net importer. And that's what MRC 21 shows. And that's the nomenclature I'm familiar with. It's data from our system. And if you look at that for the entire year of 2022, we're overwhelmingly an importer. And that was true in December as well. And you can see on MRC 21, those large drops. And again, minus is an import into the system. You can see those very large drops in most of the month, but very significantly right at the end of the month, 12/22. That's where we were having that There was a 3 or 4 day event, 20, 21, 22, 23. That's when we were experiencing those very, very cold days. And so I can't say much about that because I don't know what that is, but I can speak to the graphic in my testimony.
Okay, I think, you know, with your testimony that there were 3 days and 22 that were extreme events, peak events, in prudent planning practices, is it prudent when you're planning to address and solve for these peak events that happen 3 days in December 22, 1 day in December of 2021? And let me just give you an example. If I have one kid who plays hockey, would it be prudent for me to own a bus and drive that all year around so I can take the hockey team to one game in December? Would that be prudent?
So I don't know much about hockey, so I'm not sure how many buses it might take to travel to the game. But to answer your question directly, again, if you look at MRC 21, it's not just one event, a few hours in December that we are importing significantly.
Okay, and
It's most of the time.
Let me stop you because I'd like an answer to my question, Mr. President, which was pretty specific. And would it be prudent to own a very large resource all year round to address a singular event in December? Would that be prudent?
Well, that's not what this represents. And
Well, again, Mr. President, I would ask that the witness be directed to answer the question. It's yes or no, and he's free to explain his answer, but I would like a yes or no answer.
To the extent you can answer that question, Mr. Cashel, please do so.
Okay, so I'm going to answer it in the context of a power system. And it's not prudent for us to be in a situation where we are as deficient as we are, several hundred megawatts or more, which can affect us many, many winter hours, many, many summer hours. So I don't think your analogy is a good one. So I will answer it in the power system analogy. And I would say it's not prudent to be in the situation Northwestern's in today.
Okay, and that's fair enough, and that will lead to a next question. So we're dealing with a complex system, and maybe that's too simplistic of an analogy. So, in fairness, then wouldn't more distributed generation really help solve the problem that you are tasked with solving for, which is trying to figure out how to get lots of supply around to lots of different places in lots of different ways? Wouldn't more distributed, my question is very specific, wouldn't more distributed generation help solve for the transmission problems that you face?
Not necessarily. That distributed generation, and by the way, we have a lot of it in our system, lots of wind generation around the system, other small generation. If it's not available during those peak periods when you need it the most, it doesn't solve that problem.
Okay. Would it be beneficial going forward as we move into this, I think you called it a resource change time, to view customers not just as load, but also potentially as supply?
Mr. Chairman, I'm going to object. I just feel like we're well outside the scope of commissioner questions.
I'm going to overrule Ms. Trinell.
I'm almost finished, Mr. President.
Please proceed.
I'm sorry, can you ask the question one more time?
Wouldn't it be beneficial for Northwestern to, in your planning process, as you're looking forward, given the long horizon that you talked to us about, to start viewing customers not just as load, but also as supply?
Actually, I believe we do. We have about, the last report I saw showed that we have about 34, 35 megawatts of net metering customers on our system. And at times that actually produces less, it contributes to serving the load because the load is lower. So the customers are a source of resource.
Okay, and I'll move on, Mr. President, although I just want to ask one last question. Given the transmission constraints that you are describing, the import issues that you've talked about, the long-term difficulties of building more transmission, would you support an effort by Missoula to municipalize their energy system?
No, I would not. They would not have a reliable system if they municipalized and segregated from a fully integrated system. I would not support that from an operational standpoint.
Well, that would be their problem then, wouldn't it? I mean, wouldn't Northwestern, then you wouldn't have the problem of serving them anymore.
Somehow I think we would. I'll give you an example.
Well,
We have
we're done, Mr. President. We can move on. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Cashel.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Mill. Okay, I believe Renewable Northwest, Ms. Chilcott, you have additional cross.
Thank you, Mr. President. It's Ms. Hornbein today, and I do. No worries. Mr. Cashel, Melissa Hornbein, Council for Renewable Northwest. Thank you for being here and taking the time to answer our questions today. I appreciate it. I just had a few follow-up questions based on the dialogue that you had with the various members of the commission. First of all, there were some prior questions from members of the commission regarding the vulnerability of variable resources to extreme weather and temperature events. And I'm just wondering, isn't it true that thermal resources such as the anticipated Yellowstone County Generating Station suffer from the same vulnerabilities?
Can you help me with the question that I was asked? That's a pretty general statement, so I'd like to have the context.
I believe you had an exchange with Commissioner Fielder regarding the vulnerability of variable resources to extreme heat and extreme cold events.
Okay, so what I was referring to there is typically in what we see on our system in extreme heat or cold event. And I won't speak to solar. We don't have that much experience yet with solar, so this is mainly wind. But in an extreme heat or cold event, generally we see that the wind isn't blowing. So those renewable resources, the wind resources, are typically not very big contributors to our capacity needs, as opposed to, I think your comparison there is that typically our other resources, our hydro, thermal resources are available during peak events when we have those wind inversions or air inversions, I should say.
Following up on that question, I think my question was more directed to events that we've seen around the country. For example, the Texas grid failure. In that case, weren't the primary resources affected gas-fired power plants similar to the one that's anticipated to be built here?
In that case, and as I understand it in Texas, that was the case, but they're totally different systems too. And it was due to freezing conditions that those systems weren't built for. I would just indicate that during the 2022 event we've been talking about, gas flowed on our system, our gas-fired generation plants operated during that period of time, our coal-fired plants operated during that period of time. So it's hard to compare Texas to Montana. My understanding is Texas really wasn't built for the temperatures they saw. We see those type of temperatures pretty routinely.
Okay, would you agree that with these types of extreme temperatures, and it sounded like in your testimony in response to Commissioner Fielder's questions, that the system was pushed pretty far in that 2022 event, is that correct?
Yes, it was.
Would you agree that in that situation, having a robust regional energy market on which you can make spot purchases if necessary is a good thing?
We wouldn't have lived without we would not have made it through that event without the regional marketplace. We were so constrained that any contingency on our transmission system, within our generation system, we could have had a major blackout. So I'm not saying that the regional marketplace isn't a good thing, but the non-firm regional marketplace you're talking about doesn't assure us that it's going to be there. And I think, to my point, that's why it's risky to continue to operate the system in this manner, because at some point, if we don't have a more robust integrated system, we'll fail. And I think that picking up those pieces is going to be very messy.
Okay, thank you. I want to move on to the question of developing additional transmission, which there were a number of questions about from the commission. In both your pre-filed testimony and here today, you've sort of detailed what you perceive as the difficulties of developing additional transmission, correct?
I'm sorry, can you say it one more time? I missed a portion of it.
In both your pre-filed testimony and here today, you detailed the difficulties of developing additional transmission in Montana, correct?
Yes.
Okay. I'm just curious if Northwestern's assessment of those types of difficulties is based solely on its experience with the Mountain States Transmission Intertie project, or if it's made additional efforts to develop specific transmission projects that were not detailed in your rebuttal testimony.
Yes, we've actually attempted to build other transmission. In addition to the Mountain States Transmission Intertie, we referenced this earlier today too. We were part of a group, including the Bonneville Power Administration and the other coal strip transmission owners, to determine if an upgrade of the coal strip transmission system would be something that could be done. We didn't bring that into a permitting process because from a commercial standpoint, there was no interest in asking us to upgrade the system to provide, in that case, when we were looking at that, to provide transmission for renewables. In addition to that, we, at the same time we did Misty, we had an open season that we constructed for transmission capacity that was intended to build a collector system made up of 230 kV lines within Montana to accumulate wind generation and move that generation to markets that would need it. Likewise, when we actually went out for the open season and asked for potential customers to aid us in building and coming up with the financials necessary to build that, there was no takers. So we've done quite a little bit of that. In addition to that, we have built some internal transmission to serve local load, and those are long efforts met with permitting requirements and also resistance from landowners, et cetera. We have had a little better success. We built two lines, rebuilt actually one, and built a new line in southeastern Montana and a line up in the Gallatin area. So we've had a fair amount of experience and understand the difficulties in our own area. And in addition to that, we watch what goes on in the region, and there hasn't been any significant transmission built. Permitting is difficult. The Boardman to the B2H, Boardman to Hemingway line that's proposed has been in the process for more than a decade. They still haven't turned a shovel on that. And that's big regional companies, Bonneville Power Administration, Idaho Power, Pacific Core, all involved in that. It's just very, very hard to do.
Okay, just one more question on this issue. Were you in the room yesterday when witness Fang was testifying yesterday afternoon?
Yes.
And do you recollect the discussion that was had about the approximately $1 billion of investment that Northwestern has presumably made between about 2016 and 2021?
Yes, I do recollect the conversation.
Are you in a position to be able to tell us here today how much of that was devoted towards new transmission?
Yes. Can I look at my testimony, please? My direct pre-filed testimony for electric transmission believe it's $266 million. It's not jumping up, 233 million dollars was transmission, electric transmission. Of that, roughly $1 billion, and in gas transmission, $91 million for gas transmission. So $320 million of that $1 billion investment was electric and gas transmission.
Okay, thank you. Just one additional question. I believe I heard you testify earlier in response to a question from the commission that Northwestern currently has more wind capacity than it can manage. Do I have that correct?
Yeah, at times, I guess I would say that at times, and Mr. Steinmetz or Mr. Lefebvre could probably, or Mr. Hines could probably address this better. But from a transmission perspective, we often see during light loading periods that there's the need to export off of our system because we have more variable resources, more resources in total than our load.
Okay. Given that reality, can you explain why Northwestern hasn't previously provided for a sufficient amount of storage to take advantage of that excess wind resource in its prior IRP planning efforts?
So you're clearly outside of my area of expertise there, and I'm going to defer to someone on the supply side.
Can you tell me who that might be?
I would think that would be Blue Lefebvre.
Thank you. I have no further questions.
Thank you. Northwest Energy redirect.
I have a question.
All right, I would note for the record, by the way, that we had two parties engage in initial cross-examination yesterday on this, but please, I am not here to harm anybody's participation in this case. Please proceed.
Thank you, Mr. President. I appreciate it. I'm going to be very, very brief. And you're absolutely right. I did not ask Mr. Cashel questions on the initial cross. So thanks again. So I want to follow up on comments you made about transmission development to Commissioner Fielder and Commissioner Pinocci, and also part of the discussion you just had with Council Hornbein. And that is, are you familiar with the Transwest pipeline transmission line?
Transwest. I know that there's been I'm not up to date on it. I'll put it that way, Chuck. I'm sorry.
That's fine. So you're not aware that that's a 732-mile line that's proposed between Wyoming and Southern Nevada?
Again, I'm not up to date on that one.
Okay. And you're also not aware then that that line just received approval and will begin construction this year?
That's great.
And
I'm not aware of that.
And you're also not aware that that line will bring renewable resource energy from the Intermountain West to Southern California, among other places.
That sounds right. It's they were able to be successful. We weren't able to be successful in that endeavor.
Thanks. No further questions.
Mr. Uda, but I would note for the record that yesterday afternoon, Mr. Lowell Chandler was participating on behalf of Broadreach Power, and Mr. Uda was not available and there were no questions, but Mr. Uda, your witness.
Well, that technically, Mr. President, that's not 100% accurate. That better? Okay. Technically, Mr. President, that's not accurate. What happened was I got on the Zoom part of it and I wasn't able to speak, but I was present and did try to weigh in, and Mr. Chandler was essentially stepping in for me. But you're correct that I did not ask him any questions. The reason for that is I didn't have any questions until commissioner questions. So I apologize for that, but it is what it is, as they say.
Understood. Thank you.
Yet, good morning, Mr. Cashel.
Good morning, Mr. Uda.
I note that Commissioner Bukacek asked you a question about the difficulty of integrating renewables. Do you recall those questions?
Yeah, I recall the analogy of start and stop vehicle versus highway driving.
Okay, leaving the analogy aside, is it your impression that renewables on your system don't pay for integration?
I didn't say that, no.
No, I'm asking you, you do understand that they pay, for example, or specifically the FERC approved schedules for ancillary services, including Schedule 11, specifically for wind, correct?
Yes, and that I'm very familiar with that because that was one of the issues with our last FERC rate case was developing the appropriate ancillary services rates for wind projects on our system.
Right. And you and I were both there and we're both glad it's over. Thanks.
Just for the record, I didn't say that their services weren't paid for. I said it was more difficult to provide the service with the fleet of resources that we have.
Can I follow up, Mr. President?
Yes, of course.
No, I understand it might be more difficult, but if you feel like you're not capturing your costs, you can go back to FERC and request a change to your tariff schedules, correct?
So we could, but I would make this note that when we filed that rate case, there was a couple hundred megawatts of wind on our system that we were dealing with. Now we've got much more. So my point's still valid that as more and more wind comes on our system, we are going to have resources to deal with that. And it's more of a fact than or statement. That's all.
Right. I understand that, but you're not saying you couldn't go to FERC and change those schedules to accommodate your new reality, correct?
No, I didn't say that.
Thank you, Mr. Uda. Well, anybody else have recross for this witness who didn't recross yesterday? All right, opportunities have been provided. Northwestern Energy, redirect.
Thank you, Mr. President. Mr. Cashel, just a few. Ms. Trinnell for 350 was asking you questions about prudent planning practices for peak events. And she used the analogy of the hockey. Do you recall that?
Yes, I do.
Does Northwestern have to plan for peak load events?
Yes, we do.
And why is it important for Northwestern to plan for peak load events?
So that we can reliably serve our customers.
Mr. McGraw asked you about the Transwest transmission line. Do you recall that?
I do.
Do you know how long that line was in development before it got to the stage that it did, or that Mr. McGraw mentioned that it did?
I don't.
Do you know if they had to experience any issues related to getting that transmission line built?
I don't know, but my suspicion is that they did.
I have no further questions for this witness, Mr. President, and I would ask that this witness be temporarily excused.
All right, Mr. Cashel, you are temporarily excused. Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, Northwest Energy. No, why don't we do this? Why don't you call your next witness? And we'll get through that and then break for lunch. Please call your next witness.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Northwestern calls Mr. Tom Pancratz.
Pancratz, welcome. Mr. Pancratz, have you been sworn at this time? All right, can you raise your right hand then? Mr. Pancratz, do you swear the testimony you're about to give is the truth and nothing but the truth?
Yes, I do.
Okay, your witness counsel.
Good morning. Could you please state your name and business address for the record?
Yeah, good morning. My name is Tom Pancratz. Business address, Northwestern Energy, 11 East Park Street, Butte, Montana.
By whom are you employed?
Northwestern Energy.
What is your title with Northwestern?
My title is the Director of Electric Transmission Engineering and Major Project Management.
Did you submit pre-filed direct testimony in this docket?
Yes, I did.
Do you have that testimony before you?
I believe I do.
Is that testimony identified as the pre-filed direct testimony of Thomas D. Pankratz?
Yes, it is.
Do you have any corrections to that testimony?
No, I do not.
Mr. Chairman, I move to admit the pre-filed testimony of Mr. Pankratz as Northwestern Exhibit 4.
Is there any objection to Northwest Exhibit 4? Seeing none, Northwest Exhibit 4 is admitted.
I tender this witness for cross-examination.
Okay, the time is now 11:40 a.m. This will probably be a good time to break for lunch to accommodate the hour and 15 to hour and 20 that people have asked for lunch. So we will resume at 1 o'clock with Mr. Pankratz. Time's now 11:41. We'll go off the record.